The Legend of the Eight Immortals, produced by Liang Gu. The origin of the Eight Immortals. The term Eight Immortals has had different meanings at different times in Chinese history, until Wu Yuantai's The Origin of the Eight Immortals Journey to the East, commonly known as Journey to the East, in the Ming Dynasty. Only then were they officially designated as Lu Dongbin, Zhong Lichuan, or Han Zhongli, Taiaguili, Zhang Guolao, He Xiangu, Chao Guizhou, Han Xiangzi and Lan Saiha. The characters of the Eight Immortals have different origins and different eras. The first person to be found in historical records and who actually existed was Zhang Guolao, a Taoist scholar in the early Tang dynasty. The Eight Immortals of Huainan in the Western Han Dynasty refer to the eight Gongs who helped Luan, king of Huainan in the Western Han Dynasty, write Huainanzi. King Huainan was fond of magical elixirs, and later generations passed him down as an immortal. The theory of the Eight Immortals of Huainan may have arisen in conjunction with this incident. During the Five Dynasties, Taoist priests painted paintings of the Eight Immortals of Shu. The characters painted include Rong Qinggong, Li Er, Dong Zhongshu, Zhang Daoling, Yan Junping, Li Babai, Fan Chongsheng, and Er Zhu. Songs of the Eight Immortals in Drinking, written by Du Fu in the Tang Dynasty, refers to eight literati, including Li Bai and He Zhizhang, who were good at poetry and drinking. The so-called Eight Immortals today. It was probably formed in the Yuan dynasty, but the characters are different. During the Five Dynasties and the early Song dynasty, fairy tales and legends about Lu Dongbin were widely circulated, which was instigated by the spread of Taoist inner elixir cultivation methods. During the two Song dynasties, the Zhong Lu Jin alchemy way was widely spread. The Chuanzhen sect emerged during the Jin and Yuan dynasties. In order to respond to folk beliefs and legends and promote their teachings, Zhong Lichuan, Lu Dongbin, etc. were promoted as the founders of the Five Yangs. Folk legends, dramas, and dramas were intertwined with Taoist gods. The story of the Eight Immortals spread widely and became richer in content. Lu Dongbin is the core figure in the formation of the Eight Immortals. Taoism calls him Lu Zhu. He is an immortal respected by all Taoist sections. Taoist temples all over the world, especially Chuanzhen Taoism, regard him as the ancestor temple and worship him endlessly. The origin of the Eight Immortals in modern Taoism originated in the Tang and Song dynasties. At that time, the people had Eight Immortals picture, in the Yuan dynasty Ma Ziyuan's Yang Tower, Fan Xian's bamboo leaf boat, and Gu Zijing's Qingnan willow. There are traces of the Eight Immortals, but the members often change. Ma Ziyuan's Lu Dongbin's Three Drunks in Yang Tower, there is no He Xiangu. Replaced by Su Shenwen. In Yu Buchuan's Lu Dongbin Du Taiguai Li Yu, there is Zhang Sailang but not He Xiangu. The Eight Immortals in the Ming dynasties, the Romance of the Three Treasures eunuch, replaced Zhang Guolao and He Xiangu with Feng Sengshu and Xian Xuzi. Bangs, or Bangs. Although it is not listed among the Eight Immortals now, it is still among the Eight Immortals in many areas. In the Complete Biography of the Immortals of the Ming Dynasty, bangs were used to replace zhongguolao. In the Dancing Eight Immortals, in some areas of Jiangxi, bangs were also used to replace zhongliquan. In the first volume of Li Jianyi's Yuxizi Alchemy Sutra, written in the late Southern Song dynasty, the Hunyuan Immortals sect picture lists the inheritance genealogy of Zhong and Lu's line of inner alchemy. Although it is not entirely reliable, it is the earliest and most systematic inheritance of inner alchemy. Historical data. As listed in the picture. The first generation of Zongliquan passed down Lu Dongbin, Wang Laozhen, Chen Pu, etc., among which Lu Dongbin was the most famous. Among them, for Taoist figures, Zhong Liquan, Lu Dongbin, Chao Guizhou, and Li Taiguai, are the prototypes of the Eight Immortals in later generations. Japanese folk beliefs also have similar combinations of gods. Known as the Seven Lucky Gods, among the Seven Lucky Gods, except for Ebisu, who is an inherent Japanese god, the rest are all foreign gods. Mahakala, Bishamonten, and Benzaiten were passed down from Indian Buddhism, while Shorin, Fu Lu Shou, and Bude were passed down from China. The image of the Eight Immortals. The Eight Immortals and Taoism. They all come from the human world, and they all have colorful mortal stories, and they achieved enlightenment later. They are completely different from the sanctimonious images of ordinary gods, so they are very popular among the people, including generals, relatives of the emperor, beggars, Taoist priests, etc. Not born as an immortal. And they all have some shortcomings, such as Han Zhongli's exposed breasts, Lu Dongbin's frivolous personality, Taiguai Li's alcoholism, etc., but they are all Taoist immortals and often stay together. Zhong Liquan, rich Zhong Liquan's father, was a general and he grew up in a wealthy family. When Zhong Liquan grew up, he developed good martial arts skills, and because of his father's relationship, he had the opportunity to perform in the court. Later, he was favored by the emperor and became a general. However, he was jealous of his superior Liang Ji, which led to his defeat, so he lived in seclusion and practiced Taoism and became an immortal. Lu Dongbin, male, one of the Eight Immortals of Taoism. Lu Dongbin, whose real name was Yan, was a jinshi. He served as an official for a period of time and served as county magistrate twice. Soon, he was tired of the official life, abandoned his official position and became a Taoist, living in seclusion in the mountains and forests. Once while visiting a wine shop in Chang'an, I met Xingyang Zhenliquan. After 10 trials, Zhong Liquan. He was taught the way of the golden elixir, and finally became an immortal because of the Taoism. Zhang Guolao, old crane-haired boy-like face, silver beard fluttering, often riding a small donkey backwards. His prototype is the Tang Dynasty alchemist Zhang Gua. Volume 2 of Miscellaneous Records of the Emperor of the Ming Dynasty, Zhang Gua is hiding in Tiaoshan, Hangzhou. He often travels between Fen and Jin. At that time, people passed down a long-standing secret technique. Taizong and Gaozong of the Tang Dynasty were unable to fight again and again, so they were summoned by heaven to come out of the mountain and pretended to die in front of the temple of Jealous Girl. Han Xiangzi, younger he is the grandnephew of Han Yu, a great writer in the Tang dynasty. He loves to play the flute. The Taoist music, Tianhua Yin, is said to have been composed by Han Xiangzi. Du Han Gong should be the story of the beginning of Han Xiang's mythology. Han Ruoyun's Han Xian biography contains Han Xiang studied Taoism since he was young, and Lu Dongbin Du became an immortal. Xiang also wanted to save his uncle. Huiyu gathered his friends for a banquet and went to Hunan to persuade Yu to abandon his official position and study Taoism. In his poem, he wrote, Jie Zhao patrolled the wine. Phrases such as, "It can bloom flowers in an instant," were even more denounced as heresy and refused to be followed. Xiang Nai used gourds with a diameter of 1 inch to drink wine and drank it all over the guests. Where is the Qinling family? The snow embraces the blue and the horse stops moving forward. If you still don't understand, don't go. The image of Han Xiangzi should be rendered by the appendices contained in the biography of Han Xian and other books. Taiguai Li, Cheap Master Li, a disciple of Taishang Lao Jun, once left his body and went to Mount Huashan to fulfill the old master's appointment. Master Li made an appointment with his disciple, and if he did not wake up for 7 days, his body would be cremated. Unexpectedly, the apprentice wanted to go home to visit his mother who was in critical condition, so he endured it until the 6th day, when he was about to cremate Li Zhenren's body. On the 7th day, after Zhenrenli returned, he only saw his own ashes and his soul had nowhere to go. So he borrowed the corpse to bring it back to life, and attached it to the body of a beggar who had died of starvation, with an unkempt face and an unkempt face. He had a flat belly and a limp and supported an iron staff, so he was later called Iron Crutchley. He Xiangu, female. There are many theories about her life experience. However, there are many legends about why her daughter is the most trusted by people. When she meets an immortal on the way, she is given immortal peaches or immortal dates to eat, and she becomes an immortal and never knows how hungry she is. Able to foresee misfortunes and fortunes, and good at flying with ease. One theory is that he was a disciple of Lu Dongbin. Lan Saiha, poor, a native of Kaiyuan Tianbao period in Tang dynasty. Wearing woolen shirts in the summer and sleeping in the ice and snow in the winter, he often sings tapping songs in Chang'an City, with lyrics that have many fairy-like meanings. Someone had seen him when he was a child, and when they met again in old age, his appearance was as harmonious as before, and then he rode away drunkenly on a crane in a restaurant. People in the Yuan dynasty wrote the drama Han Zhongladu to Alan Saiha based on this anecdote. Chao Guizhou, noble according to legend, he was the great-uncle of Emperor Renzong of the Song dynasty. His name was Yi, and he was also known as Jingxiu. Chao Guizhou was the younger brother of Empress Dowager Chao in the Song dynasty. Although he was a relative of the emperor, he was indifferent by nature. I don't like fame and fortune. On weekdays, in addition to dealing with daily political affairs, his spare time is to study history and philosophy of life. He takes a very indifferent view of the joys and sorrows of life and believes that everything is the result of a cycle of cause and effect. However, his younger brother, Uncle Xiao Gua, But he was completely different from him. He was exiled for bullying the kind-hearted people. After hearing about his younger brother's plight, Chao Guizhou immediately became a monk. The 8 immortals also represent men, women, old and young, rich and poor. For this reason, most Taoist temples have places dedicated to the 8 immortals. Or the 8 immortals palace is set up independently, and the 8 immortals also appear in the temple fairs of gods. The 8 immortals also often appear in New Year paintings, embroidery, porcelain, lanterns, and dramas. It is said that the 8 immortals will also regularly go to the Queen Mother of the West to celebrate birthdays, so the 8 immortals congratulations. It has also become a common birthday theme in folk art. When folk operas are performed to reward gods, they often perform so-called immortal plays, such as Drunk 8 Immortals or Tai Chi 2. 8 Immortals and 8 Treasures. In traditional paintings and sculptures, the 8 immortals are often used to express good luck. Those who directly express the 8 deities of the 8 immortals are called the Ming 8 Immortals. Those who express them with the 8 immortals' magical tools are called the Dark 8 Immortals. Each of the 8 immortals has 1 or 2 treasures or magical objects, commonly known as the 8 treasures, which often appear in embroidery, porcelain decoration, architectural decoration, and folk art. They all represent auspiciousness and change with different scenes. Among them, the more popular 8 treasures are: the cattail leaf fan represents Zhongli Quan. The gourd represents Taiguai Li. The flower basket represents blue color N. The lotus represents He Xiangu. The sword represents Lu Dongbin. Bamboo flute representing Han Xiangzi. The fish drum represents Zhang Guolao. The jade plate represents Uncle Chao Gua. 8 immortals crossing the sea. According to legend, on August 8th of a certain year, the 8 immortals gathered at Penglai Pavilion for a drink. When the wine was full, Taiguai proposed to take a trip to the sea. All the immortals came together and made rules. Everyone must cross the sea in his own way, and no boats are allowed. Han Zhongli took the lead and threw the big banana fan into the sea. He lay on the fan with his chest exposed and his belly exposed, and floated away. He Xiangu threw the lotus into the water, and suddenly it was filled with red light. He Xiangu stood on the lotus and drifted with the waves. Later, Lu Dongbin, Zhang Guolao, Chao Guoshu, Taiguai Li, Han Xiangzi, Lan Saihe also threw their treasures into the water, and used the treasures to show their magical powers and swim proudly in the East China Sea. This is the origin of the following verse: the 8 immortals crossed the sea, each casting his own magic. The actions of the 8 immortals alarmed the Dragon Palace. The Dragon King of the East China Sea led his soldiers and crabs to the sea to wait and see, but they had a verbal conflict with the 8 immortals, causing a fight. The Dragon King of the East China Sea took advantage of the 8 immortals' unpreparedness and captured Lan Saihe into the Dragon Palace. The 8 immortals were furious, and each showed their magical powers. They came forward to fight and cut 2 dragons in half. The shrimps, soldiers, and crabs could not resist. They fell into the sea one after another in defeat, hiding under the water. The 8 immortals went back and forth on the sea calling for war. The Dragon King of the East China Sea invited the Dragon Kings of the South China Sea, the North Sea, and the West Sea to work together to stir up the sea water in all directions, setting off huge waves and killing all the immortals. At the critical moment, Chao Guizhou's jade plate showed its magical power. I saw him holding the jade plate in his arms to clear the way. The wild waves retreated to both sides, and the immortals followed closely behind, safe and sound. Seeing this, the Dragon King of the Four Seas hurriedly mobilized his soldiers and generals to prepare for a decisive battle. At this moment, Guanyin Bodhisattva happened to pass by, stopped both sides, and came to mediate. Until the Dragon King of the East China Sea released Lan Saihe, the two sides stopped fighting. The 8 immortals bid farewell to Guanyin Bodhisattva, each holding a treasure, riding on the waves and swimming away. August 8th is also known as the 8 Immortals Festival, or 8 Immortals Birthday, because of the story of 8 immortals crossing the sea. Chapter 01, Borrowing the Dragon Pill Immortal to help the filial son, and the evil official asked for the magic pearl due to greed. Listeners, it has always been said that gods are made by mortals, but I am afraid that mortals' hearts are not strong. It can be seen that the two paths of immortality and mortals have the same origin. Since there are mortals, how can we see that there are no immortals who have been cultivated by mortals? If Li Gong doesn't believe it, how about asking the author to give some evidence and let everyone study it? There are many immortals, and among the immortals, the most well-known and admired by everyone in the world are especially the 8 whole immortals. People today probably call them the 8 immortals for short. The author has been fond of Taoism since he was a child. I have read a lot of secret books and strange books on the sea, and I really have a lot of fairy tales in my stomach. Unfortunately, the personnel are too unfamiliar, and saying it will come out may not inspire people's belief. Let's talk about the story of the 8 immortals attaining enlightenment and various facts and evidence. These deeds may be known to women and children in detail, or there may be historical records to prove it, which shows that the author is not just lying to deceive others. To talk about when the 8 whole immortal attained enlightenment, how many years it went through, and how many things it happened, it is a 24 histories that I don't know where to start from. The author of the classics took great pains to find a small clue. Have you ever heard of ancient and modern legends about 2 dragons controlling water? This seems to be an ordinary thing, but it is not the result of careful investigation by the author of the Taoist scriptures. It has something to do with the history of the 8 immortals. According to the rule of starting from the heel, when talking about the 8 immortals, we have to use these 2 dragon kings as the introduction. It turns out that these 2 dragons, one is in the west of the sky and the other is in the south of the sea. In that ancient time, the area to the west of Nanfangbu Prefecture is a large sagua. The place is called Guankou. It is the land granted by the Jade Emperor's nephew Erlang God, so it is called Guankou Erlang. Nowadays, there is a county in Sichuan called Guan County, and this is the classic example. At that time Erlang Shen was guarding Guankou area. Occasionally magical. The nearby land and water residents all worship devoutly, and it goes without saying that the incense in the temple is extremely prosperous. Who knew that there had always been an old dragon in the water country? Because of the fear of Erlang's divine power, he did not dare to come forward all year round. He only immersed himself in the sea to practice, and he lived for thousands of years and became indestructible. Erlang's magical power is extremely broad. With just a quick look and his miraculous fortune, nothing about the sea or the sea can be hidden from his eyes and ears. Therefore, Long has been practicing hard for a long time. Since he doesn't dare to come out to harm others, why bother to fight him? So I just pretended to be careless and ignored him. It was an interesting day. There was a filial son on the bank, whose surname was Ping, and he had lost his father since he was a child. Only his widowed mother, Wang, was left to take care of the orphan and raise him to be a brave and strong son. It happened that Wang was blinded because of overwork. Peace leaves no stone unturned. I prayed to God and Buddha to cure my mother's eyes, but to no avail. Buju said angrily, "My mother is such a good person, why did she get such a tragic punishment?" It can be seen that the sky is unreliable, and the gods and Buddhas have no inspiration. In this way, a good filial son was destroyed. Aroused into an angry and violent temper. However, Wang's disease was already difficult to cure, and no matter how anxious his son was, it was of no use. This peaceful and troubled life lasted too long, and there was nothing I could do. I could only work hard and earn money to support this loving mother. Although Wang is blind. But I felt a lot relieved when my son was so filial. I often hear my son's grievances, and I reprimand him sincerely. As a result, Ping he had learned to keep track. Apart from working as a foster mother, he never dared to run an extra step or say a single word every day. Mrs. Wang became more and more happy and said to Ping he, "My son, even though I am blind, with a son like you, I don't need to go out to make money by myself. Losing my eyes won't do any harm." Ping he said, "Don't do this, mother. Generally speaking, being filial to your parents is something you should do." My mother, who has been loyal and chaste throughout her life, still suffers from such problems, which is undeserved. If the son wants to be able to go to heaven and earth, no matter what, he must find out the reason, get some fairy medicine, and cure his mother's eyes before he is willing to give up. Wang just thought he was talking to a child and laughed it off. Not only did he work hard in peace, but he also searched everywhere for a cure for blindness. Because I had run out of firewood at home, I went to the mountain early in the morning, cut some dead branches, carried them on my shoulders, and slowly came back down the mountain. Walking to the middle of the mountain, I suddenly saw a Taoist with a strange appearance. His expression was elegant, and there seemed to be an auspicious aura surrounding his body during his movements. Pingy guessed that he had some background, so he hurriedly threw down the firewood, stepped forward and sang Fat Nai, and asked, "Where did the immortal come from?" The Taoist smiled and said, I am not an immortal. I can only heal people's illnesses. I am just a walker. Just a doctor. When Ping He heard about it, his heart moved and he asked quickly, I wonder if the immortal master can cure the blindness that has been blind for many years? The Taoist smiled and said, all diseases can be cured, except for the blind. Hearing this, Ping He felt poof, with a sound. He picked up firewood and put it on his shoulders to go. The Taoist smiled and said, you kid, why are you so impatient? Ping He said, there is only one old lady in my family. My mother is in good health, but she is blind in both eyes. But you, a person who cures all diseases but does not treat the blind, clearly seem to be deliberately against me. What should I tell you? The Taoist laughed again and said, I don't cure blindness. Do you know that there is a doctor who specializes in treating blind people? I don't recommend him to you. Where can you find him? When Ping He saw that there was such a doctor, he hurriedly threw down the firewood, bowed to the Taoist and said, the boy has been out for a long time and is afraid that my mother will look forward to it, so he is in a hurry to go back, and his words were inappropriate just now. Taoist priest, don't blame me. Taoist priests are monastics who are based on compassion. Since there is such a doctor, Qinshi told the boy that he could go and invite him at his door. If my mother can be cured, first of all, it is the Yin Kung of immortal Chang, and secondly, I must thank the immortal Chang again. The Taoist nodded and said with a smile, you are a poor man who earns money to support your mother all day long. How can you say thank you to me if you don't have enough money? On the other hand, there is some truth in the saying that monastics are based on compassion. It doesn't matter, you and I meet here, which is somewhat of a connection. I also respect your mother-son filial piety and show you where to go. 35 miles away from this mountain, there is an evil dragon in the water. I have been practicing for a long time. Every day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I must raise my head to the water and absorb the essence of the sun and the moon. A red bead spits out from his mouth and shines on the water surface, shining brightly and translucently. It is the elixir he refined. You can go and lie down by the water, wait for him to spit out the beads, recite the mantra, Om, hum, hum, and move with your hands. This bead will fly to your hand. You can hide it at home and hang it in front of the hall. No matter how much you love, you only need to pray silently to the beads, and everything will come to you. As for your mother's eye disease, just a touch of pearl light will restore her previous brightness, guaranteeing that she will never be blind again. Those who know peace must be immortals. After hearing this, he prostrated himself to the ground. The Taoist smiled and helped him up and said, you don't have to be polite, just remember the spell and you will be sure to get it. When the old dragon sees the pearl falling into your hands, he will come to snatch it. I will help you secretly at that time, so you won't make any mistakes. Just go boldly. Then a gust of wind blew up, and the Taoist turned into a golden light. Gone for a moment. Ping He was greatly surprised. He looked up at the sky and thanked him, then returned home with firewood on his shoulders. Because he was afraid that his mother would be timid, he did not tell him. When the 3 drums were heard in the evening, he went out of the back door alone and rushed to the place instructed by the Taoist. Found a reed bush. He curled up, not even daring to breathe, and just stared blankly into the water. At midnight, I saw a burst of red light coming from the bottom of the water to the surface of the water, which shocked the fish and shrimps and fled away. The red light rose more than 10 feet high above the water, moving up and down towards the moonlight. Ups and downs. At the same time, there seemed to be a thin mist that was as white as silver and as light as smoke, surrounding the red light. He didn't have time to look at the dragon body on the water. When he saw the red beads, he almost jumped up with joy. He hurriedly calmed his mind and silently recited, "Om, hum, hum." As he stretched out his hand to move towards Hongzhou, he felt the red light flying straight towards his eyes for a moment, and he could hardly even open his eyes. He didn't even care about life and death. He stretched out his hands desperately, trying to surround the red light and search for the red beads. Unexpectedly, the red light gradually became less and thinner. But he seemed to be holding something in his hand. If he looked carefully, what could it be if it wasn't that sparkling red bead? Pinghe's joy was even more extraordinary. When he was about to get up and leave the reeds, a strong wind suddenly swept towards the depths of the reeds. For a moment, the sky was dark, the earth was dark, the sun and the moon were dim, and all I could hear was a roaring sound, like thunder, which only hovered over the top door of Pinghe. He was so frightened that he fell to the ground holding his beads and shouted, "Master Immortal, help me! Master Immortal, help me!" Meng Kelly heard someone shouting in the air, Dragons must not be rude. Listen to my decree. I am the real person of Jiuqian Piaomiao. I feel sorry for you who have been practicing for many years but have not achieved the right fruition. I also want to be peaceful and filial to heaven. I specially use Ru Dan to save his mother and perform meritorious deeds to help the world. After you lose the elixir, your body will not be saved, but your soul will still be here. You must not leave for a step. 3 years later, he should encounter a disaster, and his soul would be entrusted to you at that time. The 2 of you become one and have their own merits. You have peace and harmony, and each of you has his own place. This is killing 2 birds with 1 stone. There is no need to hate each other at this time. After saying that, the wind stopped and the thunder stopped, and a bright moon was still hanging in the sky, shining brightly on the vast expanse of smoke. Where the red bead appeared, an old dragon's head appeared on the water. He looked into the sky and clicked a few points, then hid in the water, and no sound or shape disappeared. Pinghe also hurriedly kowtowed several times respectfully, climbed out of the reeds, and returned home with beads in his arms. However, the east had turned white and the red sun was rising high. His mother was fumbling around on the bed, putting on her clothes and getting up. Pinghe didn't dare to be alarmed, so he walked into his mother's room as usual. Just as he screamed, his mother suddenly opened her eyes and said, "My child, what are you holding in your hand? It's so red, it's really beautiful. Hepping was extremely surprised when he saw that his mother could see things, but before he could explain the reason, he took out the red bead and waved it in front of his mother. His mother suddenly stood up and said loudly, "My son, where did you get this treasure?" When I saw this thing, my eyes became bright. It's actually more refreshing and clear than when I was young. As he spoke, he reached out and asked Pingy for the bead. Pingy hurriedly said, "Mom, don't be impatient, this is not how you play with this treasure. Wait for the child to think of a way to hang it up so that your mother can look at it all the time, ensuring that your eyesight will be clear for the rest of your life." I will never get sick again. His mother followed her instructions and followed Pingy to the middle hall. When Pingy tied the beads with thread and hung them in the middle, a ball of red light shone through the inside and outside. From then on, not only did Wang's eyesight disappear, but both mother and son felt physically and mentally very refreshing. Very happy. Moreover, this bead can really be called a wish-fulfilling bead. No matter what you need, as long as you pray silently to it, the needed things will naturally be found in the house. It is inexhaustible and inexhaustible. The family received such powerful support. Mother and son no longer need to worry about food, clothing, and everything else. However, he had a strange peaceful temperament. Even though he had this treasure at home, he refused to take a day off and still worked hard as usual, regardless of the weather, rain, cold or heat. One day Wang said to him, "Son, this is a lucky break. You and I have enough food and clothing, and have a good life. You are not young, so you should pay attention to find a talented and beautiful girl, and finish the marriage early, so that you can help me fulfill my great wish." Hearing this, Pingy replied, "Mother's orders are merciful, and children must obey them respectfully." Unexpectedly, after the child was given a pearl by an immortal to cure his mother's eye disease, he made a great wish and had to perform 500 meritorious deeds before he dared to talk about marriage. Now that it has been more than a month, I have been careful when going in and out, and there is nothing for the child to do, so what? Seeing this, Mrs. Wang suddenly realized, "My child, this is not difficult. I think the most precious treasure of the immortal family was originally used to help the world. Since my son has obtained it, he should make it known to others. Not only will he accumulate virtue for himself, but he will also help the immortal. Master and Mr. Long have done some meritorious deeds." He hasn't finished his sentence yet. He was so happy that he jumped up and said, "After all, my mother is so knowledgeable, why can't I think of it? Now I want to be a doctor. If a mortal has an incurable disease, just use a red bead to treat him, and he will be cured. Prolong life." There are also poor people who don't have enough food and clothing. The child can also silently pray to the red beads and give him some silver rice. When you are tired, in less than a year, if you dare, you will have done thousands of good things. Wang Shiliang said, "Very good, my son is brave enough to do what is right. Don't neglect it. Now that I've thought about it, I'm going to try it out today. See if it works or not." Ping He smiled and said, "The baby doesn't recognize anyone. Since it can cure the mother's disease, it can naturally also cure other people's diseases. Since you are taking care of my mother, why can't you help others in distress?" Wang laughed and said, "Isn't it good to be lying on the ground?" So Ping He stopped going to work and paraded back and forth with the red beads in his arms every day. Anyone who is sick will be cured if he shines his pearl light on them. At first, he only treated people from nearby villages. Later, word spread, and people from far away came to treat their illnesses from thousands of miles away. Peacefully and wholeheartedly helping others not only does not take money. Even if you cannot refuse the gifts, they will only be given to poor families in the village. There are also some honest and upright people whose life is difficult due to bad luck, so they ask Hongzhu for some silver rice to give him. In this way, in less than 3 years, the reputation of this peaceful and charitable man was established. The commotion was known far and near. He is also calm and straightforward, and never knows how to lie or deceive others. When people ask him how he learned such skills, he will always tell them honestly. Therefore, it attracts a person's attention. This person is not him. The chief of the Guankou area, whose surname was Mao and who heard that something strange happened under his administration, so he wanted to tell Na Pingyi to ask him if there was such a treasure. He should use his power as an official to ask him for the beads. When he wanted to make up his mind, he discussed it with his wife, Mrs. Hu. Mrs. Hu said happily, "If you get this treasure." But before he can cure my daughter's disease, would rather spend more money and buy it from him. If I just use force, I'm afraid it will make the people talk. Mao Hu followed his words and sent 2 messengers to the countryside to spread peace. When Ping He asked the reason, the messenger said it was an obsession suffered by my lady. I heard that there is a magic pearl for healing in the mansion, so I specially asked my husband to bring it with me. It will cure the young lady's illness and there will be a great reward. Heping said goodbye to his mother and was about to go. When Mrs. Wang heard the official call, she frowned and said, "My child, this officialdom is not easy to do. You must be careful when you go here." Ping He responded and followed the police to the yamen. When Mao Hu heard that Dr. Shinzhu had been invited, he was so happy that he came out in person to treat him politely and asked about the origin and efficacy of the beads. Ping He reported it straight from the beginning. When Mao Hu heard this, he still seemed to believe it. Then he invited him in to cure the young lady's illness. Ping He followed him inside and saw that the young lady's face was as white as paper, her eyes were fixed and she was clearly possessed by a demon. Ping He took out the divine bead and shook it at him. This bead is originally a spiritual object. How can those mountain spirits and wild ghosts block such spiritual light? But just listen to the "ah" sound. The young lady fell backwards. After Ping He received the spirit bead, the young lady jumped up again. Seeing her parents at one side, she burst into tears and said, "Mom and Dad, the baby is so miserable." Both Mao Hu and his wife were speechless in love, and Qi Xiang Ping He bowed and said, "My little girl has suffered from this disease and has been unconscious for half a year. I don't even know my relatives at home very well. Now that I have seen Mr. S magic, I immediately wake up. Mr. is really my family's benefactor." Ping He was busy being humble. The young lady said that she was playing in the back garden in the spring when a sudden gust of fishy wind hit her nose and made her dizzy. She had no idea what she would do in the future. "I don't know why," Heping said. "It goes without saying that it is some kind of fairy that possesses the body of a young lady to enjoy the blessings of the world." Mao Hu invited Ping He out of the hall and entertained him with a banquet. During the dinner, Dong Dong asked Ping He if he would sell this pearl. Ping He smiled and said, "Even though a commoner can get this pearl. But it can never be regarded as one's own. When the time limit expires in the future, Xiaobui will still be taken back by the immortal master and returned to the old dragon. As expected, ordinary people are not allowed to sell without permission. Even if the master has to go, it won't last long, so why bother?" Mao Hu only thought that he was trying to dodge, and he continued to negotiate. After all, peace is the nature of a child. He stood up in dismay and said, "The little people got this magic pearl first to cure my mother's eye disease, and then to cure other people's diseases. I only used this to make some merit, and never benefited from others. If it were placed in the master's house, how can I have the free time to treat people and live up to this pearl? The master is a noble man, and what of the clothes, food, and equipment he uses cannot be what he wants. I just got this thing, but I just want to keep it in the future. What's the use of it? But it does not delay the merits of ordinary people practicing Tao. I advise you not to do things that are harmful to others but not self-interested." After hearing this, Mao Hu became very angry and ordered many messengers, catch Ping He and search out his beads to prevent him from misleading the public with his evil words and doing evil things. Ping He was furious when he saw someone coming to catch him. He immediately stood up from the table, stretched out his right foot, kicked one person over, and knocked down another person with a punch. The soldiers shouted and rushed forward with weapons in hand. Afraid of losing his peace, he took the pearl in his hand and shouted, "Master, there is no need to be angry. Brothers, there is no need to fight. Listen to the villain." Mao Hu only thought that he was willing to offer the beads, and hurriedly told everyone to wait and see what he had to say. "I saw Ping He calmly reported, I am the official of the common people. I have my destiny, how can I dare to violate it? However, this jewel is really not something that a villain can occupy for a long time. If I am good at offering it to you, I will give it to you. In the future, the Immortals will blame you, the old dragon will ask for it, and the common people will not escape death. It is not free from the charge of careless supervision. If you disobey the master, you will not be able to leave the yamen. If death is inevitable, Xiaomen would rather die in the master's office. If you know after death, you can still seek forgiveness from the immortal master. If you don't believe me, please watch this little man swallow this pearl immediately. Of course, the common people can't live, even if they don't die for a while. They can be chopped by the master's sword and axe, but the common people dare not complain. After saying that, he opened his mouth, stuffed a red bead as big as a plum and as red as a dontia, raised his neck, and said, "Ouch!" It slid into the belly with a sound. Mao Hu hurriedly ordered everyone to grab it, but it was too late. I saw Pingy's color change drastically. His face was like gold paper, his eyes were like copper bells, and he rushed out. Mao Hu did not dare to stop him, so he left the yamen and rushed home. When he saw his mother, he fell to the ground and cried loudly. "My miserable mother, my child can no longer serve you." Wang was shocked and asked why, and she could only say, "The red beads have entered her belly." Before he could finish his words, Wang's face turned pale with fright. In a hurry, without any choice of words, she just said, "How good." "The pearl is a dragon elixir, and the elixir enters the child's belly. He is going to transform into a dragon." Before she could finish her sentence, a fierce wind blew up, and dark clouds gathered around her. Wang felt a dazzling golden light in front of her eyes, and there seemed to be the sound of dragons roaring in the air. When she looked closely, she saw a golden dragon, winding up and down. Looking at peace again, "I don't know where it is. I don't know what weird things happened after Ping he turned into a dragon, but I'll look at the breakdown next time." Chapter 02. Two dragon tears spilled into Wangyang Beach, and a fairy sword pierced the bamboo dragon's eye. But it was said that Erlang Shen had a sudden impulse and knew that he could transform into a dragon. Another wave of resentment fills the space. Unexpectedly, Pingy suffered the loss of this official and wanted to take revenge. If the dragon's body were to turn around, the area within 2,000 miles of Guankou could become a sea. The yellow turban warriors and divine soldiers were busy rushing to knock the evil dragon into the deep pool, and be sure not to hurt his life. The warriors obeyed the decree and rose in the air. I saw the dragon with angry eyes and raised eyebrows, still on the roof of the Han family, looking down again and again, seemingly reluctant to leave. Just when he was about to use his magic power, Master Miao Miao arrived in the clouds, smiled at Li Shi and said, "You don't have a consumerist mind, but there is a cause and effect between the path and this thing. Please leave this matter to me. Go back and repeat the order." When the warriors saw that it was a real person coming, they didn't dare to disobey and bowed back. The real person Miao Miao brought the dragon to the surface of the water, muttered words, and shouted, "Old dragon under the water, your incarnation has arrived, and you haven't come out yet. When the words are finished, a strong wind rose from the sea, and the same dragon flew up from the deep water, but it was an invisible shadow. The two dragons met like old acquaintances. The real person grabbed the dragon's shadow and shot 3 times at the dragon's head in midair. In an instant, the dragon's shadow disappeared and the two dragons merged into one. The real person ordered, "From now on, if you have been cultivating for 50 years, you can ascend to heaven and receive the imperial title. If you behave violently, I will kill you with my sword." The dragon respectfully accepted the decree and nodded his thanks. As soon as he got into the water, he couldn't help but look back 3 times and shed 2 drops of dragon tears. The place where the tears fell suddenly turned into a beach. There are still ruins of this beach where Guangzhou is located today. It has been passed down through the ages and is called Wangyang Beach. This is the origin. Without further ado, Master Miao Miao finished a public case and rose up in the clouds, wanting to return to his cave. Just as the clouds were rising, I suddenly saw a colorful cloud coming slowly. When he looked face to face, he turned out to be his senior brother Huolong Zhenren. The 2 immortals stopped to meet each other, and the fire dragon asked, "Where are you, senior brother?" Pian Miao smiled and said, "It's because of the evil dragon matter." It was settled. I want to go back to Hengshan Cave Mansion to wait for my senior brother, finish the dragon case and pay the order together. Go. How are things going with you now? The fire dragon smiled and said, "What you are doing is a human-turned dragon. After all, it is spiritual and easy to dispatch. What I am doing is a rope dragon. It has the same pronunciation as yours, but it is almost the same, but it takes a lot more effort. Now I am about to go to the East China Sea. Let's do this public case." Pian Miao also smiled and said, "It's time to do it quickly." Soon the lower realm will suffer a great flood, and the water-controlling saint will soon be born. In the future, the land and water boundaries will be clearly defined, which is the day when these 2 evil dragons will come to the fore. If you delay any longer and miss their achievements, it is not your fault or mine. How can I explain this in front of my ancestor? The fire dragon laughed and said, "You are such a wild man. When did you learn this sarcastic saying? It's really unreasonable for you to do such an easy thing well, but then you come to me and make such official talk." The Master Miao Miao also burst out laughing. The 2 immortals raised their hands and said goodbye. The Fire Dragon Master then headed southeast to the east coast to conduct his official business. If we talk about the origin of this official incident, it is almost the same as the evil dragon mentioned above. It turns out that the rope dragon mentioned by Master Huolong exists in the Qiantang River in the west of the East China Sea. There is a shallow beach in the central part of Zhejiang province today. Lying between the upper and lower reaches of the Qiantang River, people today call it Kilolong. The water is shallow and the current is fast, making it difficult to sail. Sometimes it is easier to sail in strong winds. Therefore, there have always been 2 legends, which are called 7 miles without wind and 70 miles with wind. This is true for all boat owners on the Qianjiang River and residents on both sides of the strait. Who doesn't know? These are words that come later. In ancient times, it was not called Kilolong, but Fulongtan. Needless to say, this meaning is because the rope dragon once lurked here as mentioned in this book. Besides, the name rope dragon is just a joke from the real fire dragon. In fact, the word rope is quite specious. In fact, it is an extremely thick and huge bamboo cable. It is tempered by the sun and sometimes immersed by the moonlight. Over the years, a reincarnated creature and an organic spirit body emerges. It was the sun and the moon that had no intention of cultivating him. However, he was molded by the nature of heaven and earth, and actually became a kind of dragon body. His body, scales, armor, mouth, nose, beard and beard were all perfect, except that he had not yet developed his eyes. Therefore, although it rises and falls in and out, it appears to be a living dragon, but it is still suffering from being unable to open its eyes. I can't see all the living beings in the colorful world. When I get hungry every day, I just rush around and buy some aquatic products to fill my stomach. Because he is so huge and well-trained, how can ordinary fish and shrimp stand up to him every time this blind dragon opens his mouth? A large number of them must be sent to his stomach. Throughout the year, he killed countless creatures. Fortunately, he understood spirituality early and had good roots. Apart from eating enough fish and shrimps, he has never swallowed or damaged boats or eaten strangers. But my body was too big, so I turned sideways. It is inevitable to make trouble and stir up trouble. Sometimes, due to blindness, one cannot see people in the world. When a boat passes by, the slightest glimpse of its appearance is enough to scare the soul out of human beings. There is nothing that can be done about it. Although the blind dragon has no intention of causing trouble, there are also many victims. I don't know which era or year it was. This fire dragon master once had 2 ministers at court and the real man walking across the beach. When the dragon appeared, the sky and the earth were dark for a moment, and the sun and the moon were blind. The real man was sitting on the beach. The boat also started to bump. The real man said angrily, "What kind of evil beast is this? How dare you cause trouble here?" When the landmen on both sides of the Taiwan Strait were called for questioning, they told the real person the actual situation and the origin and temperament of the dragon. The real man laughed and said, "How dare a rotten rope be so rude?" The 2 prime ministers asked, "Is there any way to cure him?" The real man nodded and said, "You little beast. Why should I use my sword? It's a pity that he has been practicing for many years and has done nothing bad, so he hesitates and can't bear to get rid of him." The officials all said, "This beast has very good intentions. Now that he has no eyes, he can't do anything bad. When he perfects his eyes, he will be like a tiger with wings. How can a mortal resist?" Even if the mage wants to deal with him again, it won't be as easy as today. The real person sighed, "The crime has not been revealed, and the evil consequences have not been revealed. How can we bear to kill without permission?" The Prime Minister had the most caring heart for the people. When he heard about this, he could no longer let him go. He hurriedly said, "The immortal master is not willing to kill. The 2 of us are officials of the imperial court, and we are supposed to eliminate harm for the people. Please lend me the mage's sword to use. Even if there is a natural mistake, what if someone is willing to share the responsibility and has nothing to do with the Dharma master?" The real man smiled and said, "You adults, serving the country and the people. What big mistake can you make? Having said this, Pindao lent me his sword. While talking, he took out a small sword about an inch long, shook it in the wind, and split it into two. He pointed at it and said, "This is the female sword, and this is the male sword." I heard that 222 said that this dragon must use a female sword to become a female body. Kill him. Make no mistake, sir. The chief took the two swords together in his hands and looked at them carefully. I saw that although the female sword was only an inch long, it was flickering with flames and the air conditioning was overwhelming. Taking a closer look, he shuddered and said with a smile, "Can the dragon's big sword be used for a small sword?" The real person laughed and said, "Sir, don't underestimate this sword. I learned the heavenly escape sword technique from Zhuangzi. This sword has been tempered for 3,000 years. Able to be small or big, invisible or visible, whatever you want, nothing is inferior to your ambition. If you don't use it at ordinary times, it will be as small as possible, no matter how small it is. Now that we want to use him, we should make him as long as you like him to be, as short as you want him to be, he should be as short as you want him to be. Throw it like an arrow, its speed is like the wind, and the sharp edge can reach it. Thousands of miles are not far, and 100 steps are not close. It is a rare treasure from the real immortal family. How can it be compared to the stubborn iron tempered by ordinary fire in the world? The Prime Minister was overjoyed and was about to find the blind dragon. Suddenly, the dragon turned again, and the ship's hull swayed violently. The real man was sitting in the stern of the ship. His expression remained unchanged, and he pointed at where the dragon head was. The magistrate holding the sword was so panicked that he immediately forgot all about the master's instructions. He stretched out his hand and threw the sword down. But I saw a ray of green light rushing towards the dragon's head. The real person panicked and shouted, "Wrong, wrong, why did you use the Xiongjian?" Before he could say a word, the sword had returned to the hands of the Prime Minister. In an instant, the wind and waves became stronger, and a huge dragon head poked out from the water, nodding to the real person and others more than a dozen times in the blur of clouds and mist. Just then he gently turned around and disappeared into the water in the distance, never to be seen again. This frightened the two prime ministers so much that they were confused. They couldn't say a word for a long time. I saw the real man sighing and saying, "The numbers have determined that human power is really irreversible. I think this beast dives into the bottom of the water." After practicing for many years, it is very rare to reach such an extent with a rotten rope, yet still have good roots and dare not do evil. It is appropriate to be cared for by God's heart. Although there is a small mistake in eating and drinking, it is excusable after all. Just now, the poor Taoist refuses to eliminate him, which means that he has the virtue of loving life and his pity for the Tao. It is by no means comparable to the small benevolence and righteousness of the world. However, if the two princes do not obey, they will definitely want to eliminate harm for the people. Who knows that in haste, men and women are confused, and my sword is used incorrectly. It is better to love them when they are harmed, and to rectify them when they are killed. Originally, this thing had all the bones, but only a few eyes. If you want to cultivate 2 eyes, it will take at least 500 years of meritorious deeds. Now, with one stab of this sword, 2 holes were made, which happened to be a pair of eyes. Didn't it mean that the big and small jade was the result of his 500 years of hard work? When the 2 chiefs heard about it, they looked at each other blankly, confused. The real man took his sword back and merged it into one. At this time, the waves are calm and the wind is calm, and the sun is at noon. It is really the time when the bald head is at its strongest. The real man shined his sword towards the sun and said with a smile, "This beast is really hateful. I helped him, but he defiled my treasure." After saying this, he blew the sword towards the sun, and the sword emitted a golden light. It's dazzling. After concentrating again, the real person only had a pair of empty hands, and he didn't know where he hid the sword. The magistrate calmed down and then asked, "Master, how did you know that this sword pierced both of his eyes? Besides, there was only 1 hole in 1 blow, so how could it be said that there were 2 holes?" The real man smiled and said, "Yin and yang interact with each other to create all things. If 2 yin and yang of the same sex meet, it will often cause harm. Since this thing has cultivated a female body, you use a yang sword to stab it. Wherever the yang energy comes, everything is connected, that is, the sword of the Lord has just been thrown at his forehead. Wouldn't it have caused him to have eyes that have not been fully cultivated? Furthermore, when a sword pierces something, it often penetrates the body, entering on one side but coming out on the other side. Aren't there 2 holes, one going out and one going in? All numbers are predetermined, so they can happen by chance. I think this thing should not die, but should enjoy the blessings in the future. So we met by chance. Even Pindao and the 2 adults came here just to dazzle him. Isn't it strange? Both chiefs said, "In that case, in the future he will cause harm to the world, but it will be your fault and mine." The mage can try to use magic again to cut him off as soon as possible, so as not to increase your guilt during the period of poisoning. The real person laughed and said, "That's even more unnecessary." Didn't the 2 adults nod to you and me when they saw the dragon entering the water? This is the meaning of giving thanks very much and sincerely. Since you and I have received his respect, how can we enmity for no reason? Moreover, this creature has a very humble origin, but it has such strong properties and blessings, which shows that it is not an evil person. There is no need to worry about the future. Let me say another arrogant thing. If this thing is cultivated as a whole and goes on a rampage, you and I will naturally be punished. That's it. It is also called fate. You cannot escape even if you want to. You can only make sense at that time. It is absolutely impossible for him to succeed in his cultivation and harm him at the same time. Such repeated inversions are definitely not suitable for immortals. You must know that it is unlucky to go against the will of heaven, and it is unlucky to go against the law. It is unlucky to go against the will. Disaster will surely hit you. It's not that I'm afraid of those evil beasts, so I don't dare to argue with him." When the two chiefs heard about it, they were silent. The real person added, "That said, in order to prevent the poor Taoist from doing evil and encourage him to make progress, he can use some small magic power to make him aware of the situation. It is not harmful to him himself. It's useless." As he said this, he made a move toward the bottom of the water, and the giant dragon slowly rose up again. It was very cautious and reserved, and it shook the water surface like a wave. Watch him raise his head and nod to the real person in salute. The real person said seriously, "You are a piece of bamboo cable, built into the body of a dragon. If you are a poor man, you can use a sword to create an eye, which saves you a lot of work. Your blessings are not light. From now on, you should redouble your efforts, do not slack off, and do not harm any living beings or harm your travels. Now the eyes are ready, and it only takes 3 months to fully shine. And it was opened by my fairy sword, shining like no other. If you look closely, you can see the smallest speck of hair. If you look far, you can see thousands of miles. That was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If you are content with yourself and don't know how to make progress, wouldn't it be a pity? Not only will your attainment be in vain, but you will also fear that God will sin against you and bear the burden of your many years of meritorious deeds. If you rely on some small skills. If you do bad things, it will be difficult to save your life. After death, you will be thrown into the 9 nether hells, and you will not be able to survive after many tribulations. Now, in order to encourage you to make progress and help you achieve enlightenment, I have set up a sword gate within 100 miles from here, not only for you, but also in this river from now on. Anyone who uses living creatures to practice Taoism must pass through this gate before they can escape from the mundane world and ascend to the fairy world. If you can't get through it, don't even try. Therefore, there is only a slit in the middle of the bottom cover of the gate, which is as thin as a rope. Unless the Dharma body is transformed into a thread as thin as a silk thread, it will never be possible to pass through. And when this gate is touched, the bottom cover suddenly closes. Immediately his body and head disappeared. This is the most dangerous and terrifying pass. It's not that I mean to make things difficult for you and others. On the one hand, I see how difficult it is to become enlightened, and then the value of success is shown. On the other hand, there is this level. Those who have not yet reached the level of practice dare not be satisfied with themselves, but they can always warn themselves. 3 have this power. Then he will be no different from the gods. After he attains fruition in the future, he will not be despised by others. What do you think of this method? The dragon nodded repeatedly, showing a completely convinced look. The real man shouted, "Go!" The dragon nodded a few more times and passed away. The real man did this, said goodbye to the 2 slaughterers and returned to the cave. The sun and moon of the immortal family are different, and in the blink of an eye, another 70 or 80 years have passed, but it was only when Master Miao Miao gave the advice of peace and perfection to the old dragon. Master Piao Miao and Master Huolong both came from the sect of Lao Juan's patriarch. It was unintentional for them to marry the two dragons, but Lao Jun had long known about it. It is estimated that the two dragons in the east and west will become enlightened under the hands of these two real people. After attaining enlightenment, you will have great opportunities. Therefore, he ordered them to quickly reap the fruits of what they have sown. For any creature to become an immortal, it must first transform into a human body. Piao Miao uses the method of combining two souls into one. Guanko Lao Long has been fulfilled. The fire dragon also has to try to get the bamboo dragon to go into a mortal's belly. So I bid farewell to Master Piao Miao and came in a hurry on the clouds. It was not until Killalong that, after knowing that Bianlong had opened his eyes, he had been practicing hard for 70 or 80 years. At first, he had to eat some living things to satisfy his hunger. Later, he learned the ability to guide qi and prevent food. Every day, he only found some reeds and grass in the water and swallowed them, so he would not feel hungry. Moreover, he cultivates his body to be able to be big or small, thick or thin, and finally becomes a divine dragon who has mastered the Tao and all mysteries. How could Master Fire Dragon not be happy? Use the dragon's summoning technique to summon him to the water. When the dragon saw the real person, he also looked filled with sadness and joy. He formed a huge circle around himself and hugged the real person, but pointed the dragon's head at the real person's face and shook his head. The real person must be rewarded for taking him through the dragon gate. As expected, the dragon turned into a body as thin as hair and as short as an earthworm. He cautiously crawled into the middle of the dragon gate. The gate was a mechanism set up by the immortal. If any creature passed by, the upper and lower fronts cut together fiercely. But when I heard a dragon roar in the water, the valleys on both sides shook. It is unknown what the life of this dragon is, and we will see how it will be broken down in the next chapter. Chapter 03, a special welcoming dragon gate is set up in the heart of the test, and the mortal body is thrown into the arms of a filial daughter. But it was said that Master Huolong brought the auspicious dragon made of bamboo cables. In order to follow the previous edict, he had to change his Dharma body very finely and get through the preset gate. Only if you can get through it well can you be considered successful in cultivating the Tao. If you fail to get through it, not only will all your previous efforts be wasted, but a life will be unjustly sent to the sharp point. This is the most dangerous thing. It is just a way for Master Huolong to test the courage of the monks and always encourage them to study hard. The rope became a dragon, and it was full of Taoism. At that time, it passed through without any harm. It was indeed his great supernatural power and courage that prevented his ability from being completed. How can a real person bear to die? Standing in the clouds, the real Huolong was very happy when he saw the bamboo dragon passing through the gate. He stretched out his hand and made a move, and the dragon jumped up. The real person said, "I have been practicing hard for hundreds of years, and your merits have reached 80% or 90%. Now it's time to change your body." Only then can he ascend to heaven to receive imperial edicts and rank among the immortals. The dragon couldn't help but kowtow. The real man tied up the dragon's head with both hands, pressed his chin, and found the dragon ball in his hand. Then he unfolded his sleeves and pushed his stupid body straight into his lair, Fulong Pond. He chanted the mantra of moving mountains and brought up a huge mountain, which crushed the dragon's body into clay powder. From then on, Fulongton, which was 10,000 feet deep, turned into a high mountain. Over time, the mountain tilted and meandered into the river. Sand and gravel from the mountain flew into the river, and the area near the mountain became a shoal. This is what is now called Killalong. Nowadays, the local people living nearby can still tell the story of the vicissitudes of this mausoleum valley, but it has been a long time. The legends are different, and everyone tells it differently. Besides, the dragon's body was pressed, and the dragon's auspicious soul suddenly opened its mouth and moved toward the dragon ball held by the real person's hand. Coiled around the real person. The real person holds the dragon ball in his hand and holds the big dragon in his body, just like the dragon's soul-drawing flag. Seeing that the dragon's body has pressed down the mountain, he unexpectedly touches his palm and smiles. He lowered his head suddenly and saw the dragon's soul couldn't help but look back at the deep pool. The real man immediately stretched out his hand and patted his mud ball. He said sternly, "Are you still reluctant to part with your ugly and rotten bamboo cables?" After hearing this, the dragon's soul hurriedly followed the real person, held the pearl in the real person's palm with his mouth, and walked in a winding and faint way for 3 days. More than 100 miles away, the sky shines brightly. People in the country get up early. The real person lowered his head on the clouds, pointed to the woman in coats by the river, and said, "You evil beast. Don't you see that girl by the river? This girl is already in her hair, and she is a filial daughter here. Now I will send you into his belly to make him feel. Being pregnant is like the patriarch's rebirth as a beautiful girl, and his dharma body will not be stained at all. Secondly, it seems that your background is different from others, so it can be regarded as your hard work. When the opportunity comes, I will come to save you again and have a good life." After that, he raised the dragon ball and threw it at the woman. Suddenly there was a thunderbolt in the air, and a burst of golden light went straight into the woman's mouth. The woman was so shocked that she didn't realize it. "Ah! I fainted by the river." The real person came closer and shouted in his ear, "Bu Xiuchuan, listen, I wish you pure filial piety and send this auspicious dragon to be your daughter. She will have a good life and raise you, and she will be good in the future." Na Xiu-chun listened to the instructions in a dazed state, nodded and woke up. When he woke up, a red sun was shining in front of him. In front of me, many villagers gathered by the river, talking about the thunder in the sky. Seeing Xiugu sitting blankly with clothes in his hands, everyone rushed over and asked him if he had heard the thunder. Xiuchuan was confused and couldn't answer for a while after hearing these words. Everyone also saw that he had a different look on his face. They all said it was incredible, he must have been stunned by delay, so send him back quickly. So several women came up and carried Xiuchuan to his home. His father, Mr. Hu, and his mother, Mrs. Hu and Shen, had not returned home because of the beautiful spring, and they heard the sudden sound of thunder. Afraid that he would be frightened, I was just thinking of going to the river to find him. Now seeing everyone sending him back, I was surprised and touched. When Xiuquan arrived at the house, she regained her consciousness. Because she was afraid that her parents would be shocked, she pretended to be fine and thanked everyone in return. Then he said to his parents, "Just now, there was a thunder, and it seemed like thousands of golden lights rushed into the daughter's belly, and the daughter fainted from fright. Fortunately, my sisters brought me back, and my daughter felt more at ease now. Neither father nor mother need to worry." Mr. Hu and his wife saw that he was eloquent, just like usual. Only then did a stone fall from my heart to the ground. He hurriedly invited everyone in, but sat down and invited tea. Everyone discussed for another time that thundering for no reason must be a strange sign, etc., and after saying it for a while, they dispersed. But Xiuquan didn't tell the two elders what the immortal had told him. Since that day, I often feel vibrating in my abdomen, as if something is placed inside. I was panicking in my heart, and I knew that the immortal's words were correct. My parents were expecting a child, so I vowed not to marry and replaced my son with a daughter. This was just to comfort my family ties. After all, the girl's home. How can we pass on the incense? When this life is over, my parents' bloodline will be completely terminated. In short, this is not the right thing to do. Now, according to the words of the immortal, it seems that you can get pregnant without marrying a husband, but it is not a good time to be pregnant. Although the child is still a girl, when he grows up, he will marry a good son-in-law. It can also be passed down from generation to generation, and the ancestral bloodline will not be cut off by oneself. Isn't it a matter of both worlds? It's just that others don't know the details, and I can't tell them the truth. When I give birth to a child in the future, the neighbors will talk a lot, and I won't be able to explain it at all. But I am not ashamed to death. He thinks about it like this every day, almost crushing an inch of his heart to pieces. After 5 or 6 months, his belly was swollen day by day. Xiuquan was so anxious that she had no choice but to find a way out. She was in a dilemma. She became sick from worry early in her life. She didn't eat well, had a sallow complexion and thin muscles, and her limbs were weak. All symptoms are similar to those of pregnant women. At this time, Mr. and Mrs. Hu also felt something. Because Xiuquan works at home during the day and sleeps in the same bed with his mother at night, there is of course no ambiguous matter. The couple also suspected that he had some bloating disease. Shen also tried to question him carefully behind his back, but Xiuquan only talked about his problems since the thunder that day, and did not dare to say the words of an immortal. Until October is full and the belly is full, everyone concludes that it must be a good sign. Except that his parents were convinced that nothing would happen to him. In addition, the words spoken by relatives, friends, and neighbors are not very nice. Xiuquan also heard about it, and was so ashamed that she didn't even dare to take a step outside her own door. Seeing that the delivery was approaching, Xiao Chun also knew that she could no longer hide the matter, so she reported to Shen exactly what the immortal had told her. When Shen saw it, she was surprised and rushed to tell Lao Hu. Lao Hu is a scholar, but he knew that Lao Jun was reincarnated as a beautiful girl, so he nodded and said, "There are many wonderful things in the world. If it is as Xiaoer said, this child is still a very well-established person." Moreover, Patriarch Lao Jun, the jade girl, came out from under his side. "If my son is like this, where can he find such a stable woman?" Mrs. Shen also said happily, "It turns out that an immortal has given birth to a fetus. There will definitely be immortals coming to take care of her. What should I be afraid of?" However, the daughter was young and shy, and became pregnant without her husband. This is a rare thing in the world. You are so hyped about it, who is willing to believe us? How will Xiaochuan be able to meet people in the future? Lao Hu also said, "This is exactly what can be done. Now it's just you and me talking about this reason to people we know. My family has never offended anyone. They have no choice but to ruin my Xiaoer's reputation without any evidence." Ms. Shen said yes. So the old couple talked about the matter to others. Within a few days, it had spread to everyone in the village. Some people believed it and some didn't. It always happened because of the incident. Don't do anything to yourself. There is no time to check whether they are true or false. Even those who are suspicious of Xiaochuan do not dare to criticize randomly because they cannot find the name of the adulterer, but everyone always has this suspicion in their hearts. This day is Xiaochuan's delivery day, and it's usually when a mother has a stomachache. It always feels like something is falling down. However, Xiaochuan's pain was directed upwards, as if something was rising from his abdomen and pressing against his chest. Lao Hu and his wife had no choice but to invite Lao Wenpa, who had some experience in the village, and asked him why he went to the top. Po Wen couldn't explain it. She only said that the lady's fairy fetus might be a little different than others, but she didn't know. After all, Lao Hu is more sensible, thinking that Po Wen doesn't even know the reason for such a strange birth, so she obviously can't have a baby. What if it really comes down to the threat? But where did you find such a big hole? After saying this to Mrs. Shen became even more worried. The pain of spring labor got tighter and tighter. From morning to noon, I felt that the thing was pushing against my chest and was still pushing against the ground. But this time, it was really his fault, and he was gnashing his teeth. Feeling dizzy and almost fainting. Mr. and Mrs. who were so anxious that they prayed to gods and worshipped Buddha, set up an incense burner in front of heaven, and sincerely asked the immortal who delivered the fetus to save her life as soon as possible. I was getting excited when I suddenly heard someone knocking on a copper plate outside, shouting that I specialize in treating difficult labors and treating freaks. After hearing this, Mrs. who was overjoyed and said, "My son is suffering from a freak disease, and it's a coincidence that this person claims to specialize in treating freaks. I think my daughter is so filial, so God sent an immortal to save him." Mrs. Shen also said, Hi, I hurriedly went out and took a look. It turned out to be an old Taoist nun who was lame and black. The one who was knocking and screaming was already dozens of paces away. Mrs. Shen desperately chased after her and begged the fairy ant for help. Fairy ant, save my daughter's life. The Taoist nun asked, but is it a normal childbirth or is it a weird pregnancy? If it is a normal childbirth, how about sitting on the buttocks and coming out? Lotus peanuts and so on. Outsiders on our side are not willing to take over anything dirty. If he was a freak, he could help him. Shen hurriedly said, "It's just a freak, it's a freak, it's an extremely strange and weird freak. Master, go quickly, otherwise you will be dead." The Taoist nun smiled and said, "It's a matter of time before you have a boy and a girl. Why be so anxious? No matter what, Pindao just came here from Xiajiang today and has never done any business before. By coincidence, he met weirdos like you. We are all considered to be destined, so I will come with you." So he turned around and walked away with a limp. Shen was afraid that he wouldn't be able to get up. I wanted to give him a hand. Unexpectedly, although she was walking slowly, Shen was trying her best to catch up, but she was only a few steps behind her. When he arrived at the door of Shen's house, he turned in without anyone's guidance. Mrs. Shen arrived later and found out that Gu was really a strange person. About to tell him, "My daughter has been in pain for a long time and it is extremely unbearable. Who knew that I didn't like to hear it, so she just said to take me to see your daughter quickly." Mrs. Shen led him into the room. As soon as he reached the door, he heard Xiuquan shouting from inside, "It hurts me to death." After hearing this, Mrs. Shen's heart was shattered and she couldn't care less about the Taoist nun. He fell into the room, held Xiuquan in his hands and took a look, only to see his eyes rolled up and his feet straight. It was clear that a ray of ghost had come out of his body. Mrs. Shen couldn't help crying and shouting. All he could say was, "Xiuquan, my son, why did you leave me and leave? Ah, my son. You died so painfully." It didn't matter that he was crying this time. He had already crowded in the old Hu and his relatives and neighbors from outside, but squeezed a Taoist nun in the back and was not allowed to come forward. Lao Hu was feeling sad when he suddenly saw the Taoist nun just sneering at the corpse. Old Hu said angrily, "You Taoist girl are so heartless. The person is dead and is grieving, but you are still smiling, but do you still have some heart?" The Taoist nun sneered sharply, "You invited me here, but you didn't ask for any advice. You left me here in the cold, but you voluntarily cried over your dead people. Isn't this kind of behavior ridiculous?" Lao Hu never replied. However, Mrs. Shen suddenly realized the future and was busy forgetting about Xiuquan. She jumped out of bed, separated from everyone, walked to the Taoist nun, and knelt down straight. All he could do was kowtow and cry out, but he couldn't say a word. Seeing his wife like this, Lao Hu had no choice but to come up and beg. The Taoist nun laughed and said, "Please get up, please get up. Don't be so polite. Now that Pindao is here, as I said just now, he is destined to be with the lady. Now that his life is at stake, how can he stand still and do nothing to save him? He immediately ordered him to get a bowl of clean water, spray it on Xiuquan's corpse, and shouted, "That stubborn dragon hasn't been born yet, but when will he wait?" Before she finished speaking, Xiuquan moved her eyes, opened her mouth, and moved her limbs. Lao Hu and his wife said happily, "My daughter is saved." Everyone also said it was strange. Unexpectedly, Xiuquan sat up, felt disgusted, spit out a meatball and fell to the ground with a wow sound. The sound is crisp and clear, like gold. At first it was no bigger than a pellet, but the Taoist nun sprayed another squirt of water, causing the meatball to swell 10 times. Just as he was astonished, he heard a crack sound, as if the earth was shattering, and the flesh ball broke into 2 in an instant, and a girl with red lips, white teeth, and an exquisite face jumped out of it. There was a small, sparkling bead as small as a mustard seed in his mouth. The Taoist aunt hurriedly stepped forward, took out the beads, stuffed them into her mouth, tilted her neck, and swallowed the beads. Lao Hu, his wife, and everyone were stunned. There is a commotion. Unexpectedly, the mother on the bed was already shouting that she was hungry. "Please bring me some food." Mrs. Shen liked it so much that she almost forgot about Xiuquan. After hearing this, she hurriedly went up and asked him, "Do you feel sad about anything?" Xiuquan shook his head and said, "I don't feel anything at all, I'm just very hungry." "Mom, hurry up and get me some food." Ms. Shen said hurriedly, "I am weak after giving birth. How can I eat?" Xiuquan didn't answer. He just heard the Taoist nun shout, "It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. If you are hungry, you will naturally have to eat to feel full." Not only the young lady, but also Pindao was about to ask for a wedding drink. Ms. Shen saw the Taoist nun saying this. Naturally, he was relieved, and while he was asking someone to cook, he had to clean up the cut meatball. The Taoist nun hurriedly stopped and said, "You are not allowed to touch this thing. Let me find a place for you to put him." After saying that, he looked up and saw a wooden rice bucket next to the bed, and ordered the rice to be poured out. But he picked up the 2 halves of the meatball, and when he put his hands together, it still turned into a round thing. When put together, it was like a seamless heavenly garment, with no traces visible. Then he spit out a 3-inch golden needle from his mouth and stabbed the flesh ball 7 times, making 7 holes. "Throw it into the barrel," he said with a smile. "This thing will be of great use in the future. No matter how much you want, as long as the child picks it up, it will be available immediately. It must be kept well." After that, Shen saw the child bandaged and placed it beside Xiuquan's pillow. Then we went out and sat down together. Lao Hudong asked where Gubao Temple was and what the name of the Dharma was. The Taoist nun smiled and said, "Monks call me cows and horses. I don't need any name as long as it's done by others. I can be called whatever the donor likes. It's hard to meet without fate, but we can't live without it if we have fate." As for the place to live, there is no certainty. If you have a fixed place, just like the donor, you can just receive blessings at home. Why rush around early in the morning and late in the evening? Old Who saw that his words were very mysterious, and he couldn't help but feel respectful, because he asked. The little girl became pregnant without her husband, she gave birth to the fetus by mouth, and she was born from an egg. I don't know how good or bad it is. Also pray for clarification. The Taoist nun laughed and said, I'm not an immortal. How can I know these truths? But I think the benefactor has good intentions and the young lady is a pure and filial daughter. God is so merciful. Could he send a bad guy to squander your property and destroy your family tradition? Lao Hu could only thank him. After a while, Mrs. Shen asked for help and sent a table of plain wine, asking the Taoist nun to use it as she pleased. The Taoist nun was not polite, she drank until the wine was dry, and the food came to her belly. When everything was empty, she said thank you and hurried out the door. Lao Hu and his wife hurriedly sent each other off. As soon as he went out, there was no trace of the Taoist nun, and he had no idea where he had gone. Mrs. Shen complained to her husband, this Taoist nun is an immortal, why don't you let him sit for a while so that I can ask him a few questions? Lao Hu smiled and said, how can the immortal stay in your home for a long time? You see, he disappeared in the blink of an eye as soon as he walked out of the door. It was obvious that he was eager to go. What's the point of keeping him? Thinking about it, although our child is a daughter, she is truly blessed and must be better than other men. Therefore, due to some strange origins, an immortal came to deliver the baby. You and I just need to listen to the immortal's instructions and educate this child well. The blessings of nature are endless. Why bother with the immortals? Ms. Shen said no more. The old couple and Xiao Chun really cherished the child like the apple of their eye. This child is also strange. He can speak after 1 month. Lao Hu named him Long and personally taught him how to read and read. At the age of less than 10, he has learned a lot. Because of his old age, Lao Hu sent him to study at a private school in his village. There are 7 or 8 primary school students, both boys and girls, generally around 7 or 8 years old. Not only are they far different from him in terms of talent, but their character and temperament are also clearly superior in every way. When people see that they are not as good as him in everything, they can't help but feel jealous. Mr. Kanji also praised Long for his excellent character and academics, which was far beyond the reach of others. Therefore, he became more and more jealous, and they often contacted Long to bully Long. Long adheres to his mother's instructions and only focuses on his studies. In addition, everything was done for everyone, so they lived in peace for several years. One day, when he had something to do, Long finished his lessons early and sat quietly at his desk, waiting for his teacher to finish class. Suddenly a classmate asked him to do a few sentences for him because he couldn't solve the problem. Long was afraid that his husband would know and didn't dare to allow it. Na Xingming bullied Long for being cowardly. He first scolded him, but when Feilong refused to reply, he simply scolded his mother, Xiuquan. It is said that Feilong has a mother but no father, and the mother was pregnant before marriage. She is obviously an illegitimate daughter. How can she deserve to study in a private school? Feilong is a very filial and polite person. How could he cause his mother to be humiliated because of his own affairs? Although he didn't reply at the time, after school was over, he cried and told the teacher that he could no longer come to take up the job. The husband was shocked and asked why, but Feilong never answered. He returned home and cried bitterly to his grandparents and mother without saying a word. Lao Hu was frightened and confused, and asked quickly, "My child, who bullied you again? Tell us quickly, and I will vent your anger for you." Feilong shook his head and said, "You two adults, don't be suspicious. This is something that cannot be explained. Although my granddaughter, I don't want to say it even to death, but from now on, in this school, my granddaughter will definitely not go." Lao Hu was confused when he saw that he couldn't get a clue. It happened that his husband came and asked about the matter. Everyone was confused. Because Feilong decided not to enter the school anymore, he had to leave him temporarily. A few months later, it was rumored by his classmates. Such is the case. Moreover, the classmate who slandered Feilong saw that Feilong took leave and never came back to the study. He started to talk nonsense and insisted that Xiuquan was really having an affair. He randomly named Zhang San and Li Si and said that he was Xiuquan's adulterer. Have a baby. Because the incident was leaked, both his mother and daughter were embarrassed, so they stopped reading the book. Naturally, many people believed such nonsense and believed it to be true. Not long after, the words reached the ears of Mr. and Mrs. Hu. Mrs. Shen told Xiuquan during the meal, and Xiuquan exchanged tears without realizing it. Silent. I don't know what the funeral will be like, but I'll wait and see what happens next. Chapter 04, Being Slandered and Pregnant Without Her Husband, a girl who knew her true feelings threw herself into a river. But when Xiuquan heard what her mother said, she couldn't help but feel sad and burst into tears. From that day on, he stopped talking, never smiled, and ate less. I frown my eyebrows every day, and wrinkles appear on my forehead. Looking at this situation, it's clear that he has something important on his mind that he can't express in words. After a few months, my body became thinner and thinner, and my interest completely disappeared. Even though we are living in this world, we are just like ordinary people. But he was in such a dejected and dying state that even strangers felt sad for him when they saw him. At this time, his parents also felt that his situation was strange, and the couple had to work hard to persuade him. Unfortunately, Xiuquan neither told her sad things or the cause of her illness. No matter how much you try to persuade him, he will just smile at the moment, pretend to be obedient, and claim to obey orders. In fact, his mind has not changed at all, and he is still sick as before. Unexpectedly, misfortunes never come singly. Xiuquan's family lost interest because of Xiuquan's illness. However, The epidemic was prevalent that year. Death was everywhere in the village, and Xiuquan's parents died one after another at that time. Xiuquan mother and daughter could not help crying and mourning, so they bought a coffin to bury them. When the funeral was over, Xiuquan suddenly called Feilong and said to him, "My son, do you know that your mother is not married? Do you know where this body comes from?" Then he caught up and said, "Why doesn't your mother get married? If I'm not married, why would I give birth to you for no reason? Why did he raise you up like this?" Feilong heard that his classmates were bullying him. He also really inquired about his origins and the story of Yinyang giving birth without getting married. However, the villagers are curious and love to talk about strange things. There is nothing strange about it, but when it comes to their mouths, they have to dress it up in all kinds of strange ways. If something really weird happens, even less, you should not add a lot of twigs and leaves to it. The truth often told is completely false, and the question is thousands of miles away. Moreover, Zhang Jia said this, and Li Yi said this again. From both sides, it seems that the donkey's lips are not in the horse's mouth. Make the flying dragon look like the play says, "It's okay if you don't ask." I became even more confused when I asked him. He didn't dare to ask his biological mother and two ancestors, so he had to keep it in his mind every day, thinking that he could always ask if he got the chance. If there was nothing wrong with the mother, she was indeed pregnant without her husband. He wanted to negotiate strictly with the classmate who insulted him. To regain the reputation of chastity for my mother and to regain my lost dignity. These are all hidden thoughts in his heart, and others cannot see them. At this time, I suddenly saw my mother asked about this suspicious case. She hurriedly knelt down, kowtowed and said in tears, "Mom, why are you asking about this today?" If the child could understand the whole story, there would have been a way to prevent my mother from living such a sad and tearful life. Feilong's words were just right. They didn't make his mother lose her identity. He also fully revealed the grievances that he had wanted to understand for a long time but had not dared to speak out. After hearing this, his mother began to mourn loudly, and let her beloved daughter kneel in front of her. She did not try to pull him, but said sadly, "Ignorant beast. Even you yourself don't know where your body comes from, but how can I, as a mother, know?" After saying that, Feilong choked again, but still let Feilong kneel on the ground. Seeing this situation, Feilong naturally didn't dare to get up, and couldn't say a word anymore, for a long time. Then he saw his mother dug out a piece of paper from her pocket, threw it to the ground, and said loudly, "If you want to know everything about your birth, it will be all on this piece of paper. If I hadn't done anything for you, a bastard would never have done it for you. Don't listen to a lot of gossip and suffer endless injustice in this world. If I don't give you an explanation from now on, I'm afraid that you will live in this world in vain and suffer injustices that I, as a mother, cannot bear. So now that my parents are gone, now that I have shouldered my responsibilities to you, I also need to relax my shoulders a little bit. From now on, you can be a pure and innocent person, and I, the mother, can pay off your debt early and avoid suffering any more in the world." After saying that, without looking back, he covered his sleeves and returned to his room. This flying dragon was holding the piece of paper and kneeling down to read it carefully. Only then did he understand his origins, the reason why his mother was pregnant without her husband, and how she had endured hardship and slander for more than 10 years. There are a few farewell words at the end, which match the tone of what my mother just said, which clearly shows her determination to die. At first, I was lost in thought and didn't notice his mother's actions. After reading the article, I felt very sad and painful, and tears fell on the paper. I couldn't help but look up and saw that his mother was no longer sitting in the seat and had walked away at some point. Phalom's urgency was so extraordinary that he almost retracted the tears he just shed. Where are the traces of his mother? He was so anxious that he searched everywhere in front of and behind the house, but there was no sign of him. I also thought that in the blink of an eye, I wouldn't be able to get very far anyway. What if he just threw himself into the river? I hope it won't be submerged for a while. So he hurried to the river to take a look, only to see a letter left on the river port, with the words, "Phalom, my son personally sends it." Regardless of life or death, Phalom pulled it open and saw that it read, "If I die early, you cannot live. Even if I do not die, you cannot be a human being. I was here in this port when I was pregnant with you in the past. I am here in this port when I leave you today. If you don't want to part with me, you can summon my soul here first. After a day or two, my body will rise and you can bury me on a high mountain. The family is extremely poor and has nothing to change, so I recall the immortal instructions from the past. If you are in urgent need, you can ask for it from your naughty shell. I devoted myself to serving my parents and raising my son, and endured hardships for more than 10 years. Fortunately, it has passed. There is no urgent need, so I haven't looked at it. Now that I know you are in trouble, I will tell you. Your naughty shell is in the rice bucket behind my bed. If you have immortal roots, you will become a great weapon. I am a female and don't have much experience. It's not enough to teach you. You encourage me, but I won't do it. This is what Fu Longer knows. The last signature is, Mother Xiuchuan must write. The flying dragon looked at the water. The water was calm and silent. Only people who were looking for the excitement were crowded on the bank. After Phalom read his last words, he cried and fainted. Fortunately, the neighbors helped him home. Phalom woke up and still wanted to look for his mother's body. Neighbors and friends had to follow him to the riverside with their own tools and help him search. There are ropes to measure the depth of the water, and poles to explore everywhere. There are also people who are good swimmers who float on the water everywhere to see if there are any corpses. But the result was nothing. Phalom cried loudly and suddenly jumped into the water to explore it himself. At that moment, everyone shouted, "Longu can't go. You can't swim. Aren't you afraid of drowning?" Unexpectedly, Phylong was originally the incarnation of a real dragon. Although he was an adult, his nature remained unchanged. As soon as I entered the water, not only did I not feel stuffy, but I felt physically and mentally comfortable, which was more refreshing than on land. Moreover, his eyes are clear, and he can see every grass and insect carefully even at extremely deep places. Seeing him sinking into the water and searching everywhere, everyone on the shore was frightened and shook their heads. Everyone sighed, saying that he was a filial child, but this time he would be dead. When everyone was watching the movement and was unable to save anything, they suddenly saw waves on the water with a lot of white foam. Then countless fish, shrimps, turtles, crabs, and the like were rolled downwards like flying with the waves. This is because the dragon is the king of the water tribe. Once the flying dragon enters the water, how can these small animals live in their homeland? When they saw him, they were so frightened that they flew away and ran away desperately. Everyone is surprised. Only then did I see Phylong holding a corpse in his hands, jumping out of the water and swimming towards the shore. When everyone saw it, they were happy for him. They all said, "After all, a filial daughter is cared for by the gods." He, who has never known water, can actually find his mother's body from the bottom of the water without the help of gods. Is that okay? Everyone was talking and cheering on the shore. When the flying dragon floated to the shore, everyone helped to pick up his body. Phylong himself jumped ashore, lay on the corpse and cried endlessly. Everyone stopped him. They all helped him lift the body up. Unexpectedly, there was a large object tied under the belly of the corpse. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a large stone. Only then did everyone realize that he had a will to die and was afraid that his body would not be able to hold it up for a while, so they borrowed the weight of the stone. It sank easily just now. Everyone sighed again and said, "I can't believe that this sister is so fierce." They hurriedly took off the stone again. The flying dragon was carried on its shoulders, and 7 or 8 people carried it home. You have to buy a coffin and all the expenses. Phylong showed his mother's suicide note to everyone, and led them to the rice bucket behind his mother's bed to take a look. Sure enough, it was a shiny round ball with 7 holes on only one side. The neighbors, some who knew it and some who had seen it, all said, "That's right, that's right." In the past, the immortal had indeed given these instructions when he was about to leave. Moreover, if there were any last words from the royal family, Long Gu could secretly and sincerely ask for the immortal's care, and it would surely come true. Everyone was talking enthusiastically when they turned around and saw the flying dragon staring at the ball, as if in a trance. They didn't know what was on his mind. Everyone pushed him away. Just then he came to his senses, smiled and said, "This is my own thing, why should I be honest?" Without hesitation, he extended a finger to explore the seam of the ball, and the hole immediately enlarged, allowing a finger to be inserted. When Phylong put his hand in, he found a piece of silver. Explore again. I also got some plain clothes, as well as incense, candles, shoes and hats, and all the things needed for mourning. Except for the coffin, which had to be bought with money, I got everything else. When everyone saw it, they all marveled at it and said that from now on Long Gu would no longer have to worry about poverty because of this rare treasure. It is easy to build a palace. Phylong also had some enlightenment at this time, and he was not happy at all after hearing these words. He only asked someone to help him quickly buy a coffin and bury his mother, but he buried the coffin in the middle hall and stayed with it every day and night. Every meal must be sacrificed, and every sacrifice must be cried. After waiting for 7 days, Phylong prayed in front of the spirit and said, "The child wants to avenge his mother and go to find his enemy. The mother's ghost is not far away, and he needs to take care of the child." After blessing, he stood up and looked into the ball. With a sharp knife, he walked out of the door and ran to the home of the classmate who spread the rumor. Claiming revenge. Unexpectedly, that family was a local wealthy family. After hearing that Phylong always claimed to assassinate his enemies after Xiu Chun drowned, he made preparations in advance and paid a lot of money to hire 2 warriors, who would accompany them wherever they went. Then I heard that the flying dragon was coming. Then he ordered the 2 warriors to fight him. Although the poor Phylong has roots, he has never practiced martial arts in his life. He only has a little filial piety and comes regardless of everything. In terms of real skills, how can he rival 2 warriors? After a brief exchange, they stabbed him in 2 places. Fortunately, one person is very kind. He refused to do something very cruel. Seeing that he was already injured, he stopped the waiter in a hurry and said, "We are paid by others, so we just need to ensure that he does not suffer from others. This little sister is a true filial daughter. You and I will never hurt him. No. If you harm him, you will be punished by God." The man also understood. Fortunately, he comforted Phylong with some words, hid it from his employer, sent him home, and gave him a pack of medicine for his injuries. After all, their boss knew about this and received a scolding when they returned. They were immediately asked to walk and hired someone to guard them. The flying dragon returned home. He lay on the coffin and cried bitterly all day and night. Unconsciously, he felt dizzy, exhausted, and unsteady. He fell next to the coffin, as if in a dream. Suddenly, someone called out in his ears, "Hu Phylong, your master has arrived, why don't you get up to greet him?" Phylong was thinking about asking the famous master to learn some martial arts so that he could carry out the assassination. After hearing this, he felt like he had his own master. He hurriedly opened his eyes and saw that the room was full of cigarette smoke. There were 4 boys, 8 green robes, and 16 yellow scarf warriors. In addition, there was a troupe of fairy music, whose music was melodious and very beautiful. Everyone gathered around an immortal holding a sword. There are lotuses growing under the feet, and the look is very solemn. Phylong suddenly remembered this immortal master, as if he knew him well, but he couldn't remember him. But regardless of this, he knelt down on his knees and approached the immortal's feet. He kowtowed to the ground, bleeding, and cried loudly. He just shouted, "Master, save me! Master, save me!" The immortal ordered him to get up. He asked with a smile, "Where did you meet me from? Maybe you remember?" Phylong thought about it for a long time, but couldn't answer for a while. The immortal sighed slightly and said, "We have been apart for a long time. How can there be such a demonic obstacle?" After saying this, the boy took out a small round mirror and looked at himself. The flying dragon lay on the ground. He tremblingly took the mirror with both hands and looked at it once. However, after the boat in Killalong was wrecked and the human and animal utensils sank in the water, leaving only a piece of rope, he began to practice Taoism and became a dragon. Remove the beads from your mouth. Scene by scene. Fully reflected. Phylong looked in the mirror, suddenly realized, and kowtowed. The real person spit out something from his mouth and shouted, "I still care about this thing of yours, so I'll give it back to you." Phylong saw that the thing was round and shiny, as big as a mung bean, but it was an excellent divine bead. Phylong understood in his heart. It was the elixir that I had practiced in my previous life. I hurriedly took it in my hand, immediately put it into my mouth, and swallowed it with a pop sound. The real person said, "Go and take a look at your naughty shell." "Where is it?" Phylong went in and took a look. Strangely enough, he didn't know where the big ball had gone. He ran out to report it, but he seemed to be thinking about it. The real person said, "Duh, if you have the real thing, you don't care what the fake one does." Phylong's heart became more and more thoroughly clarified. The real man was overjoyed and told him, "You have achieved great success from now on, and you will be able to parade through the worlds of humans and immortals." Not long after, there was a decree from the Jade Emperor that he and the old dragon from the west would become husband and wife, and they would be appointed together, have children and grandchildren, and rule the world. I am also worried that you have too few magic spells, and I am afraid that you will make the immortals laugh. Now I will teach you the 5 elements escape method and the 36 transformations, as well as the methods of summoning gods and generals to drive away ghosts and conquer demons. You can then go out of the underworld and enter the secluded world, ascend the world and the earth, travel around the 4 major continents, and travel to and from the 3 mountains and 5 mountains, free and easy without hindrance. When you receive the order, I will take you to pay homage to the Jade Emperor, Yuanshi and Laojun Patriarchs, the major golden immortals, and your uncle Miao Miao. He is Shihai Lao Long's master. He is also going to teach Lao Long many spells now. In the future, you two will always be husband and wife. If you are not good at it, not only will you not be worthy of him, but I will also lose my dignity to your uncle. You must practice hard and study hard, and don't let me think you are a failure. The Heart of Hope. Phylong bowed again and said, "I have received the grace of Master from heaven and earth and have recreated my virtues. How dare I fail to learn on my own and let down Master's grace to achieve perfection?" Master Huolong smiled and said, "It's good if you understand. When you and I meet, we are always destined. It's not that I'm grateful or not." The Heart of Hope. Philong bowed again and said, I have received the grace of Master from heaven and earth and have recreated my virtues. How dare I fail to learn on my own and let down Master's grace to achieve perfection? Master Huolong smiled and said, It's good if you understand. When you and I meet, we are always destined. It's not that I'm grateful or not. Don't succeed in those words. All in all, if you can love yourself, you love me. The way to love me is greater than self-love and greater than self-respect. If you can understand this truth, I have nothing to worry about. The flying dragon kowtowed and accepted the instruction. The master sat down and closed his eyes in silence. All the attendants were also silent. That night, every family in nearly 100 miles saw 5 colored clouds above the Hu family's house, reaching directly into the house from mid-air, and a strange fragrance was inhaled into the nose, which refreshed people's spirits and invigorated their spirits. Everyone in the nearby village already knew that the children of the Hu family were immortals descended to earth. There are many strange things that have been spread, which is not surprising at all. Only people who are far away and have no connections can't help but make a fuss and talk about it when they hear such scenes. There is a person with good intentions who would travel all the way to visit. There are also people who believe in immortals and seek Taoism, expecting that there must be immortals descending to the lower realm to have such auspicious aura and auspicious light. They cannot help but feel a desire to seek salvation, and they all come to see the reality. Overnight, there were hundreds of people gathering from all over, and the commotion lasted until the 5th drum was approaching. Everyone saw with their own eyes the colorful clouds and the fragrant fragrance coming from Hu House. They couldn't help but look around at the cracks in the door, and some even climbed up high branches to peek into the room. The most surprising thing is that everyone sees it differently, and some actually see the immortal sitting on the throne and preaching, and the disciples sitting in line to listen to the scriptures. Some said that there was no sound in the room, and there were many lions, elephants, tigers and leopards patrolling and guarding the courtyard. Others said that they saw a big dragon lying at the feet of the gods, listening to the preaching, etc. There are different opinions. In fact, what these people saw was quite good, but everyone has different foundations. Fate also has its own depth, so what we see is different from near and far, inside and outside. If you want to know what kind of magic power the real person used this night, and how the flying dragon was taught, wait and see next time. Chapter 05, Legend of Longius. Historic sites on the Qiantang River. Apprentices on the east coast are looking for their master. But it was said that Master Huolong was the eldest disciple of Patriarch Lao Jun and one of the best Daluo Jingxian in the upper world. He came here specifically to preach and save Philong and fulfill his long-cherished wish. So the situation is different from previous births. At first, he was single and alone, or he showed his true form, or he transformed into a human body. There are no signs of coming and going leisurely. This time, however, he brought his attendant immortal officials, summoned lions, elephants, tigers, and leopards, and had the local mountain god 2D as the guard officer. The kitchen king and door god of the house served as the running battle. The atmosphere was really solemn and solemn. First, let's point out the origin of the flying dragon. In the middle of the night, he began to teach Fai Long many Taoist techniques, and asked him to go for revenge. He was only allowed to hurt his body, but not to kill anyone. After finishing the work, he went to the East China Sea to practice immortal magic, waiting for the arrival of the old dragon from the west, and being called to heaven together. The real person did not stand up until the 5 drums were about to end, stepping on the lotus, and the colorful clouds slowly appeared. The melodious fairy music, surrounded by the immortal officials and immortal officials, all flew into the air. Behind him was a big dragon, fangs and claws, wagging its tail and head, following closely, as if to send him a respectful farewell. It wasn't until the real Dharma was gone and the colorful clouds gradually dispersed that the dragon flew back to Hu's house. This is the original form of the flying dragon. After Fai Long swallowed his own pills, not only did he become extremely powerful, but he could also transform into a dragon, a human being, an immortal or a god, and he could change at any time. Since this time when I was sending you off to the real person, I have appeared in my original form several times since then, so I have seen him all over the place. Everyone knew that she was the original girl of the Hu family, so she was named Longyu in the place where the Hu family was. It is still called Longyu County today, and this is the origin. The flying dragon was taught the immortal method by a real person. He was a very talented and intelligent person, and he understood it all at that time. Moreover, I also remember all the Ying Ju mantras clearly. After waiting for the real person to pass away, and fearing that I would lose my memory over time, I quietly recited it at home for a few days, not forgetting it, and then I was ready to take care of the unfinished business in this world. The first is that my biological mother committed suicide because of the insult made by that frivolous classmate. This revenge must be avenged. Since the immortal agreed to maim his body, this matter can be dealt with first. You must know that Fai Long at this time is no longer comparable to the weak and incompetent child 3 days ago. Don't say that the house only has a few warriors to guard it, but it doesn't matter if it recruits tens of thousands of horses and troops. But he didn't want to do something that shocked the world. He was still a child and went to that house to fight. Both warriors were beaten so hard by his 3 punches and 2 kicks that their noses were crooked and their mouths were crooked, and they were unable to get up. When they were about to break in, many family members, each armed with sticks, swords and guns, rushed forward and surrounded the flying dragon. Fai Long laughed unconsciously and suddenly saw his classmate following a Taoist priest. He walked out timidly. It turned out that they had recently learned that the Hu family had the ability to descend into immortals, and they were deeply afraid that Fai Long would come to look for him after learning Taoism, which was not something that a brave person could resist, so they asked their friends to hire a Taoist priest in the city. It is said that he is a loose immortal who plays in the human world. He calls himself a Taoist who is not stupid. The immortal accepted the invitation from that family. He thought that the Hu family was just an ordinary family. How could they invite immortals to descend? He didn't believe that the children of the Hu family were actually dragons incarnate, so they were more like fairies pretending to be gods. He would not hesitate to frighten the fool, and would come to slay the monsters for him without hesitation. When the flying dragon defeated the two warriors, Gangzheng also arrived. The whole family was so delighted that they invited him to come first to see if this flying dragon was actually the incarnation of a real dragon. The Taoist readily agreed. The classmate who pulled Fei along went out to the front hall and saw a girl with delicate features and gentle features, showing off her power. Seeing him beating a group of family members with bare hands and fists until they had no way out, they screamed in pain. The Taoist frowned when he saw it, judging that Fei Long had some abilities. Wanting to strike first, he muttered words and shouted quickly. A thunderbolt popped up in the air, and there were already 7 or 8 small dragons rushing towards the flying dragon. Fei Long had never fought with anyone in his life, let alone used any Taoist magic, and this Taoist took advantage of him when he was not guarded. Fei Long was caught off guard by being so naughty like a cold arrow. He didn't even have time to use the escape method taught by his master, and was knocked to the ground by the 7 or 8 little dragons. The Taoist was overjoyed and offered another marble in his hand, shouting, "Honey, take his head." Before he finished speaking, a black light suddenly flew towards the dragon's head. It was too late to say it, but it was faster then. Although the flying dragon fell to the ground, he understood in his heart that when he saw the black light flying towards him, he felt anxious. Suddenly he felt Naiwen jump, and dragon pills gushed out from his mouth, rising straight into the sky. Suddenly the sky became dark, the thunder shook and the wind blew wildly. In the darkness, there are thousands of golden lights that dazzle people's eyes. It turned out that his true body was drawn out by the dragon pill, so wind and thunder came, and the sky and the earth became dark. Those dazzling golden lights are the scales on his body. As soon as his true form appeared, not only the small black energy dispersed into a puff of blue smoke. Even the 7 or 8 little dragons were so frightened that they showed their true colors. They turned out to be just a few rotten straw ropes. Fei Long fully understood at this moment, and his expression became more and more calm. When he saw these straw ropes, he laughed so hard that the dragon's body trembled. He thought to himself, only Taoists have leaders, and dragons have ancestors. But I don't know that the rotten straw rope has disciples and grandchildren. He brought these things to scare me. He was really overconfident. Unexpectedly, his smile and trembling caused a big disaster. It turns out that his Dharmakaya is a huge body, although his magical powers can be big or small. But because I was not used to performing surgery, I couldn't be so considerate in my rush. Unknowingly, the entire dragon body was revealed. No matter how big his house is, he still can't move. Fortunately, he is on the patio and can lift most of his body to a high place without causing much harm to anyone. Wait until he smiles vertically and his whole body trembles, that's when things go wrong. But when there was a sound of "Hululu," the faucet twisted its head and knocked dozens of houses to the ground. He quickly retracted its tail, and there was another sound of hurulu, and the hundreds of houses of his enemy were destroyed. Become a field of rubble. Many trees in front of the house, behind the house, and outside the village were knocked down at the same time. As for the people under the collapsed houses, it is even more conceivable that a large number of them are as crushed as meat paste, and they are becoming more and more disfigured. Phylong realized that he had caused a big disaster and hurriedly took back the dragon pill. Transformed into a child, looking back at the ground, I felt that it was wet. It turned out that it had turned into a vast ocean of water at some point, and the water was gurgling towards the east. Phylong hurriedly jumped in the air again and looked around with his divine light. Only then did he realize that the water had reached the Qiantang River and turned into a small bay. Later, the local people called Nealonggang this place. At that time, Phylong had no time to think about this anymore and had to leave the beach in a hurry and return to his home. Wuzi was in a state of confusion, and her heart was shaken. She thought about it for a moment, and suddenly she began to mourn in front of her mother's coffin. I only thought that if I met an immortal master, I would be able to succeed from now on, but I didn't know that a small negligence caused such a big disaster and affected many good people. The master is a great Luo Jingxian who can know everything in advance. How can he afford to be punished in the future? After crying for a while, I suddenly changed my mind. Now the revenge has been avenged and the disaster has been caused. The sin is condemned. It is useless to regret and cry bitterly. I think the second most important thing for me is my mother's affair. My current troubles are all caused by my mother. How can I bear to have my mother's coffin stay here forever? If I suffer a disaster in the future, who will bury him? Think of this. Buju sighed and said, "Those who have a miserable life can't handle it. It has already happened, but I didn't care about his own affairs. I actually buried my mother and then followed my master's order to go to the East China Sea to wait for the verdict. So, kneel down and cry before the coffin for a while." At this time, he stopped disturbing others, took up the summoning god technique, and invited many Tianding warriors to carry the coffin to a high mountain. Because he now went to the East China Sea, he placed the coffin facing the east. I also asked the local people in this mountain to help me, and it took less than an hour. So they built a very high tomb, moved hundreds of pines and cypress branches from other places, and surrounded the tomb with dense bushes, making it very powerful. In the northwest of today's Longyu, there is a steep mountain called Phylong, which is named after the burial place of Sichuan. Besides, the flying dragon is whimsical. Seeing that everything is over, he will follow his master's orders and go to the East China Sea. Because I thought I had caused such a big disaster, even though it was unintentional, I recalled that in my 2 lifetimes since I had attained enlightenment from Mian Lian, I had never caused such a big thing, with such a large number of casualties. It is not yet possible to eliminate misfortunes, blessings, death and life. But now I have to say goodbye to my mother's grave for a while, and I can't help but feel extremely sad. Suddenly he thought that he was only a few hundred miles away from the East China Sea. He had learned the art of walking on the earth from his master, and after that he transformed into a dragon body and could not move back and forth in the air at will. If disasters and farm buildings are punished by God again, it is better to walk from the ground to the sea, and open a ditch wherever you go. From then on, if you want to visit the tomb, you can go back and forth through the ground. People are not aware of the ghosts, and they are not allowed to frighten the world and harm themselves. Man, isn't that a wonderful thing? I feel very happy when I think of this. I was about to try to get into the ground, but then I suddenly thought about things on the surface of the water. Now that I'm invading his land, I must first tell all parties about their land rights, so as not to cause trouble again. So he needed the secret and recited a mantra to summon the land in the mountains to tell him this. The landmen faced each other, all looking embarrassed. Phylong said angrily, "There is only one way to walk, and it doesn't hinder anything. How can you be so ruthless?" Seeing his anger, the locals panicked and said, "God, please don't misunderstand us. Because of the various places, the anger is there. The thickness is different, the taste is different, and the fields are fertile. The quality is loose and solid. This is all destined by God. The lucky people can get blessed land, while the miserable people can only get some bad soil. How can one withstand God's drilling of the earth, but not connect the good and bad lands in a single line, and then be unable to tell the difference between high and low? It is unavoidable to confuse the good and evil in the world, good and bad, which is contrary to the principles of reward and punishment and retribution of God. If we investigate in the future, we will find out that the little gods have humble positions and small positions, so how can they shoulder the responsibility? After hearing this, Phylong realized that what he said was reasonable and every sentence was true. But he was eager to go to the grave. It took a lot of time to come up with this idea, claiming that it was a perfect plan. There was nothing wrong with it, and there was no better way than this. After hesitating for a while, he said to the locals, "Although what you said is true, as far as I know, good people will be blessed and evil people will suffer. This is the principle of retribution. How can you let me play all over the place just because of my disturbance? Even if the earth's veins are connected, once my Dharma body passes through it, there will definitely be a spring. In the future, it will be easier for people to get water. Doesn't it count as a sacrifice of merit? I have made up my mind, everyone can help, everyone can help. I will definitely report it again if I have the opportunity in the future. If we couldn't help, I would go it alone. I didn't expect that I would be able to cross the sea one day." The earthlings tried hard to persuade them again, but the flying dragon was not willing to listen. It waved away the earth, even though it tried its best to burrow into the earth. Sure enough, the magic of the gods was extraordinary. Watch him transform into a medium-sized Dharma body, go from the mother's grave at Lingtu to the ground, and make secrets all the way, first from high to low, and then from west to east. In less than a day, he has connected a ground line to the ground. Even the Eastern Sea. Feilong was overjoyed and immersed himself in the East China Sea to practice the talismans. Whenever I think about my deceased mother, I will go in from Haikou and follow the tunnels. In a short time, I can reach the tomb directly. Later generations thought that this vein was opened by a flying dragon, so it was called Dragon Vein. Later, although this dragon vein was still sealed by Su Zhenren, the story spread and became a classic. Today's people who pay attention to feng shui often talk about dragon pulse heads, which comes from this matter. In fact, according to the facts, it is not consistent, and it is just an echo. Let's talk about Feilong hiding in the East China Sea to practice martial arts and avenge his crimes. Look, more than 10 years have passed and the master has not come. There was no news of any punishment. I feel half worried and half happy in my heart. Since entering the sea, he has adhered to the teachings of the Fire Dragon Master and devoted himself to studying and never interfered in foreign affairs. There are also many intelligent animals in the sea, so he knew that a divine dragon with high moral standards had arrived. Some of them were jealous and wanted to do harm, but due to their poor skills, they were killed by Feilong several times. There are also those who sincerely want to become his disciple and learn some morals, but Feilong always thinks that he is not very good at Taoism and has not received permission from his master. No matter what, I don't dare to accept disciples without permission. Afterwards, everyone knew that he was not easy to get close to, and they did not dare to mess with him. Feilong also felt at ease, calmly practicing his mysterious skills. Since he was so dedicated and hardworking, he naturally made rapid progress, even though it only took more than 10 years. Thanks to him, he has mastered the cultivation methods and various spells passed down to him by Master Huolong. At this time, his ability is only that of the golden immortal in the sky, and he may not be able to compete with it. As for the earthly immortals and scattered immortals in various places and caves, as well as the demons and ghosts in various places and mountains, the tallest one is just on par with him. He also made 2 long dragon beards into 2 swords, which were usually hidden in his nose. When used, they could be lengthened or shortened at will, and they could kill humans and monsters thousands of miles away. He also used the 3 flavors of real fire to train Long Dan, which can set fire and absorb water. Swallowing mist creates clouds, and can absorb other people's magic weapons. As soon as the crystal light appears, any rare treasure is like a magnet and attracts iron. He was very proud of refining the 2 treasures. He remembered that his master once said that Master Shu Miao Miao also taught the old dragon the magic power in the West, but this dragon had a male body. From what Master said, it seems that he and I are still husband and wife. When we meet in the future, I don't know who is better and who is worse. I can practice Taoism and acquire valuable treasures, so I won't lose my master's face. But I don't know why my master is here today. Could it be that he knows that I disobey orders and get into trouble? So you no longer want me as your disciple? If this is the case, I will have to work hard for hundreds of years, but I will not be able to be among the immortals and receive the imperial edict. I will be able to watch that old Western dragon with his head raised in the sky for nothing. For a moment, I will not only be ashamed, but also angry to death. I thought about this for a long time. Unconsciously, I became extremely panicked. I originally wanted to transform into a human body and go to the master's cave to ask for instructions. But if master didn't ask me to go before I left, wouldn't he be annoyed if I left and he came again? The flying dragon thought for a while but had no idea. It's a dull day. Suddenly I thought, why don't you turn into a Taoist nun and go for a walk on the shore? Maybe you can get some news about Master and the old dragon of the West Sea. It's better than being bored in the sea and getting nowhere. After making up his mind, he immediately jumped onto the shore and turned into a young Taoist nun holds a whisk in hand and carries a sword on her shoulder. Wandering to a busy place. I saw that the people coming and going were very crowded, but they were just businessmen doing ordinary business and country farmers going to the market to buy things. Phylong was used to seeing him when he was roaming around, so he didn't pay much attention to it. He was content with what he saw and walked to the outskirts without realizing it. It was late spring, and the mountain flowers were as red as fire, reflecting the soft green grass and green pines and cypresses. The scenery was really lovely. Phylong walked up the mountain and sat down on a big rock to enjoy the natural scenery. Suddenly I saw two pedestrians at the foot of the mountain. An old man and a young man walked one after another. Looking at them, they looked like they were dressed in otherworldly clothes. Phylong couldn't help but pay attention. His body and eyes had already been refined to a very high level, and he could see clearly that the old and young Taoists were all radiant and graceful in their manners, which was beyond the reach of ordinary Taoists. Already full of surprise. After a while, I heard the old Taoist order, "Apprentice, we are already in Huicheng. You wait for me over there. I will go and find you again with your uncle. You have a bad temper, so you have to be patient in everything. Don't take out any money. If you have that rude temper, you might get into big trouble again. I don't have the shame to plead for you anymore. Moreover, the more troubles you get into, the deeper the tribulations will be. If you experience repeated tribulations in the future, it will be you who suffers the consequences, and no one else can do it for you. Do you understand?" The young man showed a very respectful look and said, "Master, just relax and leave. This disciple will not dare to cause trouble again." The old man opened his mouth and smiled. Phylong was just trying to see where he was going, but in the blink of an eye, Xiao Dao was the only one left, and the old Taoist voice had disappeared. Phylong was shocked and said, "This old Taoist skills are not inferior to those of my master. I met him by chance. I have to go up and get to know them, maybe they also know about my master." Thinking of hurriedly making a retreat, he arrived in front of Xiao Dao in only 3 steps. Xiao Dao was not surprised when he saw Phylong in such a state. He asked, "Where did you come from? Why didn't I see where you came from?" Phylong said with a smile, What's so strange about this? I just saw that your master is truly a master of Taoism. I really admire him very much. I came here specifically to ask, and I want to ask my little brother Gao, where is your hometown? Feilong finished his question. If he said it so politely, Xiao Dao would definitely be willing to make friends with him. Unexpectedly, Xiao Dao didn't talk, he just kept looking at him up and down, which made Feilong laugh and said unconsciously, "You little brother, you probably don't go out to make friends. So I don't even understand the principles of making friends outside." One sentence had already made Xiao Dao anxious, and he shouted, "Where do you come from, little goblin? Don't even ask me how old I am. I'm 10 times and 100 times older than your great-grandmother and your first-generation ancestors. Why do you call me little brother?" "Because I abide by my teacher's precepts. I am extremely patient and unwilling to argue with you. You don't know how to live or die, and you confront me in a rude manner. Who is justified and who is not?" Feilong said, laughing so hard that he fell down. If you want to know what is funny, please read the next chapter. Chapter 06. The two dragons fighting for Spirit, and Spirit grabbed the pearl, making trouble for the Jade Emperor in the upper world to seek virtue. But when Feilong saw that the Taoist boy was only a teenager, he called him little brother, and thought he was extremely polite. Unexpectedly, this angered the Taoist boy, who actually said that at his age, he was the first-generation ancestor of a flying dragon. This made Feilong stunned for a moment, then he suddenly burst into laughter and said, "You are saying this for me? That's really good. You think I'm not worthy of being your first-generation ancestor's wife? Ha, this is really ridiculous." Feilong's original plan was to cultivate himself from a rope to a human body, and then transform into a dragon body, which would take at least 1,000 or 2,000 years. It was indeed 17 or 18 generations longer than an ordinary human being, and it was not too much. Unexpectedly, the Taoist boy was very dissatisfied. Like the flying dragon, he couldn't help laughing wildly and said, "It turns out that there really are such arrogant women in the world who don't know how to grow up or know how to advance or retreat. Don't panic, just take my halberd. Try your ancestor's magic weapon." When he said this, he already had his halberd in his hand and stabbed the flying dragon in the face. When the flying dragon saw the Taoist boy attacking, of course he could not give in any more and had to draw his sword to respond to the enemy. The two of them started fighting on the road at the foot of the mountain. Just after the fight, both sides felt that the guy opposite had some weight. Each other couldn't help but be shocked. They didn't dare to underestimate the enemy, and they all tried their best to stab each other. Back and forth, the battle lasted more than 20 rounds. But the Taoist boy was so excited that he jumped up in the air and shouted, "Little demon, look at the ancestors' treasure." The flying dragon took a look and saw that it was a red bead sliding and rolling in the air. In an instant, thousands of red lights rushed towards the flying dragon. Surround Feilong's body in red light. Feilong felt like his whole body was on fire. It was getting hotter and hotter, and he couldn't bear it. He couldn't help but get angry in his heart and shouted, "Good boy! How dare you make your ancestor's wife happy? You have treasures, don't others have treasures?" While drinking, the beads also spurted out from your mouth. Immediately, the sky was filled with golden light, which blocked the red light. The two lights fought with each other, making the air full of golden and red light, flickering back and forth. Although it was noon at this time, the strong sunlight had long been covered by the two lights and could not be seen at all. It frightened many people so much that they closed their doors and hid in their homes, not daring to come forward. The Phylong and the Taoist boy had been fighting each other for a long time, but they couldn't decide the outcome. They didn't know what the red bead was, but it had the same power as his own dragon pill. He thought, how about using a spell to grab this bead from him? On the one hand, you can get rid of the Taoist boy, and on the other hand, your own dragon pill will be matched, but it will also be fun. Thinking about it, he secretly recited the mantra. He reached out and struck the red bead, and sure enough, the red bead responded to the curse and fell into his hand. The red light also gradually dissipated. Phylong was enjoying himself when he suddenly felt that the golden light he emitted had turned into a wisp of gossamer and was gradually invisible, and he couldn't help but be startled. Looking up, it's not the case. His dragon pill has also reached the hands of Tao Tong. It's funny that the two of them seem to have exchanged beads. Although there is no distinction between victory and defeat, each thing has its own owner and cannot be used by others. Both of them exchanged their own things for other people's things, knowing that these were treasures made from their own essence and soul. In themselves, it can be said that people are elixirs, and elixirs are people. They change in size and command as they wish. If it had been anyone else, how could it have been as effective as this? At this time, both of them started to feel resentful. It was the Taoist boy who got angry first, and he suddenly transformed into a big dragon. His head and tail were more than 30 miles apart, and his two dark eyes were looking at the flying dragon. A big mouth like a basin of blood rushed towards the flying dragon. Phylong then realized that the Taoist boy was also a fellow Taoist, so he turned around and got out of the ground beside the Taoist boy. It turned out that he was also a huge real dragon. The two dragons met and circled each other. It only makes a large piece of blue sky flicker, and the fog disperses and the clouds fly. The sentient beings in the lower world were so frightened that they closed their doors and burned incense, and everyone kowtowed. In this fierce battle between the two dragons, each lost the great elixir he had cultivated. According to legend in the world, it is called the two dragons grabbing the pearl. This is the story. The two dragons fought hard all day long, fighting tooth and nail and refusing to give up. Budao fights higher and higher, reaching the middle realm and looking forward to reaching heaven. When the Jade Emperor was enthroned in the sky, he was discussing the official affairs of Tianqiao with many immortal officials. He saw two lights of gold and red rising straight into the sky. He felt very strange. Later, the two lights gradually dissipated, and suddenly a fishy smell touched my nose, which made me feel even more suspicious. Then he asked the Immortals, "What kind of bald head is this, and why does it have that stinky smell?" "I am the Lord of Heaven and rule the 3 realms of true Immortals. How can such evil spirit come up to the treasure palace? Please go and find out where it is. Report quickly." In order to send generals to kill him. When Taibai Jinxing Li Changeng came out of his duties, he prostrated himself, saying that he was willing to find out the demon, and he immediately went to report it. The Jade Emperor agreed. Li Changeng followed the Jade Order and went out of the Nantian Gate. He pushed away the clouds and looked down. He saw the evil dragons fought hard and were beaten to pieces. My head was bruised and bloody, and I think I was knocked unconscious from the beating. Instead of descending, I gradually ascended, hurrying and making trouble, until I arrived outside the Nantian Gate. Li Changeng pressed his sword and shouted, "You must not be rude to evil beasts. Look up and see where this place allows you to act so wildly. Why don't you retreat quickly?" When the 2 dragons heard this, they were all startled. They stopped and looked around, and saw an old Taoist standing in the clouds and scolding loudly. The 2 dragons had never been to the heaven before. Although they saw the Jade Tower looming in the sky, they only recognized it as the residence of some king and were not very frightened. Seeing that Chang Gung was speaking rudely, they all got angry and said, "Old slave, how dare you curse others so rudely? What do we have to do with you when we fight for our own good? Why do you want to take care of these idle accounts? Very good. Since you are speaking arrogantly, let's deal with your donkey head first and then compare the outcome." The 2 dragons did not wait for Chang Gung to argue, and flew towards the Nantian Gate together. Li Changeng was so frightened that he turned around and ran away. They rushed to the treasure hall and said, "There are 2 demon dragons in the lower realm who are rebelling. Now they are coming to kill the treasure hall. Your Majesty, please hurry up. Quickly send troops to defend." The Jade Emperor was shocked and said, "What kind of demon dragon? Why don't you ever hear anyone talk about it? Now who should be announced to slay the demon?" Before he could finish his words, he suddenly heard a gust of wind in front of the palace. 2 evil dragons who did not know whether to live or die were really coming up, shouting in unison, "Hurry up and sacrifice the old man, and spare the life of your country. If not, let's do it." The whole country will be drowned in one moment. After hearing this, the Jade Emperor panicked and asked, "The demon dragon has arrived. Quickly announce that all the generals guarding the Tian men will block the pass. At the same time, I summon my nephew Erlang to quickly bring the heavenly soldiers to subdue the demon." Li Changeng hurriedly went to Guankou to summon Erlang. At this time, there were 4 generals, Deng, Xian, Zhang and Tao. Everyone comes with weapons to fight the 2 dragons. The 2 dragons were furious and used all their strength to hit the palace with their heads and the Tian men with their tails. They twisted their bodies and threw the 4 generals thousands of miles away. The Jade Emperor and many immortal officials were so panicked that they quickly retreated into the back hall. But I heard a sound of heaven and earth falling apart. The two dragons had already knocked down a corner of a palace, and knocked many of the furnishings in the palace to pieces. The two dragons kept saying that they were still looking for the old man to go out and die. The Jade Emperor didn't realize that Long Yen was furious and said, "I am the Lord of Heaven. I govern the three realms of civil and military immortals. Now the demon dragon has rebelled and dared to attack the palace and destroy the palace. There is no one who shares my worries. How can I die in shame?" One sentence made a group of attendant immortal officials turn red and silently facing each other. At this time, the two dragons outside became more and more fierce. He actually wanted to fly into the back hall. When the 8 great immortal officials around the Jade Emperor came out to the front of the palace, they shouted, "Those two dragons, where did you come from? How did you achieve enlightenment? Why did you go to heaven for some reason? Please explain them one by one quickly. What you need to know here, this is the Tongming Hall, where the Jade Emperor lives. How can you allow you to act so recklessly? Today, the Jade Emperor has a decree, pity you that it is not easy to practice cultivation. If you are willing to repent of your sins, you can forgive me a little. If you continue to be arrogant and obsessed, I am afraid that when the heavenly soldiers arrive, your bones will be reduced to ashes, but your thousands of years of hard work will not be in vain." When Erlong heard about it, he realized that it was Tian Chao Ling Mansion. This trouble was really big. They had no choice but to talk about what happened and how they fought. Angry at the old man's unwarranted humiliation and unwilling to accept it, they repeatedly made concerted efforts to capture the old man and sink him in the East China Sea to fill his belly with fish and shrimps. "I don't know, once I enter this place, I never come out." He was furious and caused trouble, but he didn't know it was in the Jade Emperor's palace. Now that they are all aware of their sins, they dare not do anything rash again. They also asked the Great Immortal to ask the Jade Emperor to forgive them for their ignorance and forgive their grave sins. But he refused to tell his origin, the year he practiced Taoism, and the place where he practiced Buddhism. When the immortal official heard this, he relaxed his mind. "Come back and report to the Jade Emperor." The Jade Emperor said, "Everyone who practices Taoism must have a master. Who is the master of the two beasts? I will ask them again, but I will find their master to punish them for the crime they deserve." When the 8 immortals came again to deliver the edict, they didn't know the two dragons. Knowing that he had offended heaven, he did not dare to stay any longer and had fled to the lower realm. The Jade Emperor had just left the palace again and summoned the immortal officials at all levels to discuss the aftermath and the suppression of arrests. However, Li Changgang brought Guanko Erlang and all the soldiers to obey his orders, and said to him, "There is also an old dragon under the rule of Wei Chen. He became a demon and suddenly used magic to move a mountain of earth a few days ago. He suppressed the sea surface at Guanko, changed the water into land, and took the credit for the creation of heaven and earth. Just as he was about to send troops to capture him, he escaped in advance. I am now ordered by the Ming dynasty to arrest the evil dragon. I wonder if he is a demon who just talks about it." When the Jade Emperor saw this, he he expressed his condolences and immediately led his heavenly troops to go down to the realm to fight against the rebellion. Erlang went there according to the order. When the Jade Emperor saw that the corners of the palace were tilted, the pillars were crooked, and many of the equipment were treasures from all over the world, they had ruined them into disgrace, and he couldn't help but feel unhappy. Li Chang'ing asked, "I am the Lord of all heavens and the leader of all immortals. How many people in the heavenly court who are outstanding in magic and proficiency are allowed to run rampant by these two demons, as if they are in a deserted land? Could it be that none of the immortal officials in the dynasty could keep up with these two little demons? In such a situation, from now on, the beasts in the lower realm will be able to do whatever they want with a little bit of skill. There is no law and order. Even my palace of transparency was demolished one day by monsters and devils, and not a single tile remained. What's going on? There is no need for me, the Jade Emperor in name only, in the three realms. Please wait and see if there is any way to get you to clarify." Tianting Anyan, everyone expresses his feelings and speaks frankly without hiding anything. Li Chang'ing came out of the class and said, "Long-term governance will lead to chaos, and chaos will lead to disaster. Both chaos and safety are determined." Wei Chen listened to Lao Jun and Yuanshi discuss the calamity in front of the Baiying Palace. He once said that there would be a small disaster in the Tongming Palace this year. The humble minister thought deeply that God, the leader of thousands of immortals, presided over disasters. Even if there were disasters, how could he disturb the enlightenment? Therefore, he snickered at the tortuous words of the two immortals. There must be no doubts, and he would no longer think about it. Unexpectedly, there is a disaster like this evil dragon now. In response to the words of the two immortals, we can see the principle of disaster. Although the great saints and immortals, we know the reason but cannot avoid it. I also heard that Lao Jun predicted that there would be a great flood in the lower realms soon, and hundreds of millions of people and animals would be submerged. Fortunately, a saint has been born into the world, and he will soon be appointed as the first assistant at the command of the Holy Lord of the lower realm, and he will be responsible for controlling floods in the future. At that time, the boundaries between water and land were redefined. Things on land have their own rulers to manage them, but things in the water require two skilled and talented dragon gods to control them. He has sent his eldest disciples Huolong and Piaomiao to collect the two real dragons and lurk under the water. Wait for the call when the time comes. Said again. There are two dragons, one female and one male, and they are also related to marriage. In the future, they will get married and give birth to dragons. They will be the lords of the southeast, northwest, and interior seas. They will assist people and kings. They will be ordered to go to heaven to ensure peace in all seas and the disappearance of fairies, insects, fish, and the like. Everyone lives his own life. This matter is very important. Could it be that these two monsters have this ability? If he were an ordinary dragon in the world, he would have nothing to say or do. I'm afraid he would be a stubborn shell and would not be able to reach the middle and upper realms. Wei Chen thought, if you want to know the truth of this matter, you only need to go and ask the old Master June, and you will definitely understand. The Jade Emperor said. Having said that, I thought that since those two dragons were saved by Lao Juan's disciples and were waiting for the edict to control the floods, they should be respectful and careful and prepare for the edict. How could you dare to act so rashly? Even if the fate of the calamity is predetermined, and Erlong is responsible for such a serious crime, how can he be re-employed? Wouldn't it make all the immortals in the world laugh at my unclear rewards and punishments? Chang Gung continued, Lao Jun is the ancestor of all immortals, and Huolong and Miao Miao are the golden immortals of the upper realm. They must know the cause and effect. I will go to ask for the explanation, and then report it again. The Jade Emperor accurately reported, go quickly. He also said, the management of chaos and safety is a matter of calamity, but it is a matter of recruiting talented people. After all, it is the duty of an emperor. I observe that most of the ministers on the left and right are not capable of adapting to the situation. From now on, I plan to cultivate talents and appoint wise men. You should ask Lao Jun on my behalf whether there are such talented and virtuous immortals, and ask him to recommend them to prepare for the selection of Qiansheng. Even if you can't find him for a while. However, I also ask for his careful guidance on how to cultivate and cultivate. Li Changging was ordered to leave the palace and ride the clouds to the top of the Eight Views Palace. He saw that the situation in the palace was different from that in the Tongming Palace. It was very quiet and solemn. There were many strange flowers, grasses, strange birds, and colorful birds outside the palace. Endless fun. Because Chang Gung had the Jade Decree, he did not dare to look at the scenery and hurried forward step by step towards the palace gate. As soon as they arrived in front of the palace, they were greeted by the white crane boy who smiled and said, the ancestors knew that you, an old Taoist, would definitely come. Chang Gung scolded, you evil beasts must not be rude, go and report it quickly. He said that I wanted to see the patriarch. When the boy saw Chang Gung calling him an evil beast, he turned his head and said with a smile, I treat you, a shameless old man, because you just called someone an evil beast and suffered a big loss. You had to run away and hide, and you were almost in trouble. The Jade Emperor has no rest and dares to come here to curse. Well, you have the dignity to come, go in and see my ancestor by yourself. There is no need for me, a bastard, to inform you. After that, I sat down on the rock angrily and called for birds. As soon as I heard the sound, hundreds of birds came together, red, green, white, black, large and small, male and female, and flew down in a large flock. They hugged the boy and formed a large circle. When the boy moved, the birds followed him and surrounded him. The boy was looking for his own happiness